Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and we got a World War III alert. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we got some late night revolutionary classes and dinner for y'all. Let's get right into it. Putin continues to humiliate NATO and crushes them in Ukraine. They surrendering. They don't want to fight. Resistance is futile. Salute family, we in here. Late night revolutionary classes.
The successes of the Russian army on the battlefield have become so obvious that even the most ardent Ukrainian and Western propagandists can no longer hide it from the public. Basically, in their articles and reports, these propagandists try not to address the topic of towns and cities liberated by the Russian army. Instead, they tell their audience fairy tales about some kind of successful operations by Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, the huge losses of the Russian army in manpower and equipment, and dozens of destroyed Russian warplanes, ships, factories, and armories. At the same time, they continue to turn a blind eye to the fact that with each release of their new ridiculous article or video, Ukraine is getting smaller and smaller.
Won't be long enough for Ukraine.
By the way, today was no exception either. Unfortunately for Ukrainian and Western propagandists, on the morning of January 16th, war correspondents reported another success of the Russian army in the Special Military Operation Zone. In particular,
salute to my brother Brooklyn Zoo for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
They confirmed that on January 16th, at 9 a.m. Moscow time, Russian troops entered the settlement of Vremyevka and took control of the main highway, through which the Ukrainian grouping was supplied in the city of Velikaya Novoselka. At the same time, it is worth noting that the entry of Russian troops into Vremyevka took place 24 hours after the Russian army liberated the settlement of Neskachnoye. Judging by this map, it becomes clear that the city of Velikaya Novoselka is in a semicircle and may soon repeat the fate of the liberated Volodar. According to war correspondents, the Ukrainian army units have already begun to leave the city in small groups. At the same time, it is reported that the first to flee the city were the so-called foreign mercenaries, many of whom are active duty soldiers and officers of armies of NATO countries.
Shalom, Queens. Still up.
By the way, over the past 30 days, cases of mass...
Salute to my brother Brooklyn Zoo. He done double back for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
Flight of Ukrainian soldiers from their positions have doubled.
Keep the lights on in the house.
Furthermore, the Ukrainian General Staff recognized a significant rise in the number of mass surrenders among Ukrainian soldiers in crucial frontline areas. Let me remind you that just a week ago, the elite 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade of Kiev, which underwent military training in France, almost completely ceased to exist. The fact is that the Ukrainian soldiers trained by the French began to flee and surrender en masse as soon as the military command transferred them to the Pokrovsk direction of the front.
Surrender en masse. You're not reporting that on the news. They don't want to fight anymore. They can't win and they know it.
And today, almost 10 days later, yet another scandal is playing out in Ukraine. So, a few hours ago...
Imagine, see, and I studied World War II. This was real bad for the Nazis then to be the last men Nobody want to die when the war is over, and so they know Trump is finna negotiate they surrender. So these people like, man, let me surrender now. I don't want to die waiting on Trump to get in office. This is all bad for Joe Biden and those money launderers.
A Ukrainian officer of the 143rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, Alexander Ovsy, officially announced the mass flight of 200 Ukrainian soldiers from the 468th Battalion of this brigade. Moreover, Alexander Ovsy stated that there were also commanders among the fled Ukrainian soldiers. According to him, this mass flight of Ukrainian soldiers and officers took place in the Kupiansk direction of the front near the settlements of Yureknia and Kalanovo. At the same time, it is reported that the Ukrainian soldiers and officers who fled from their positions also received military training in such NATO countries as France, Poland, Germany, and Britain.
NATO can't train them to defeat Russia. What a joke.
Commenting on the mass flight of Ukrainian soldiers, the commander of the intelligence unit of the Ukrainian army, Denis Yaroslavsky, bluntly stated that the NATO countries were to blame for this. According to him, the military training of soldiers in Western countries is simply terrible, and is not designed to create strong and trained soldiers to conduct intense combat operations against a professional enemy army. Moreover, Denis Yaroslavsky also touched upon the topic of the mass flight of Ukrainian soldiers from the elite 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade, who received military training in France. According to him, within a few months, the French turned Ukrainian soldiers into real sissy musketeers, who began to be afraid even of the sounds of ordinary artillery shots. As a result, as soon as these soldiers found themselves on the battlefield, in real combat conditions, they began to flee and surrender. Moreover, Ukrainian telegram channels showed interviews with 2 Ukrainian officers of the Ukrainian General Staff, who bluntly stated that the military training of Ukrainian soldiers in NATO countries not only does not strengthen the defense capability of the Ukrainian troops, but also significantly weakens the combat potential of the Ukrainian army. According to them, NATO soldiers and officers have no experience in fighting against a professional enemy army. Many of these NATO soldiers are not physically and mentally ready for full-fledged combat operations against a strong opponent. These NATO soldiers are unable not only to capture well-fortified settlements, but even to organize an effective defense. Commenting on the words of the Ukrainian officers, reputable military expert and analyst Boris Gerolievsky said that he perfectly understands the discontent of Ukrainians. According to him, NATO has never fought against peer adversaries. Western countries, led by the United States, have for decades fought only against deliberately weak rivals, with weak armies and weak air defense systems. Boris Gerolievsky noted that NATO countries, and in particular the United States, absolutely do not care about Ukrainian soldiers. In his opinion, in Ukraine, NATO is closely studying the course of hostilities against the professional Russian army. That is why NATO countries continue to send their soldiers and officers to Ukraine, as part of the so-called Foreign Legion. All this is done to ensure that the North Atlantic Alliance gets at least some experience in conducting military operations against a strong rival. At the same time, Boris Gerolievsky noted that all offensive actions of the Ukrainian army in both the Zaporizhia and Kursk regions were developed exclusively by NATO generals. As a result, in the summer of 2023, the Ukrainian army suffered a crushing defeat in the Zaporizhia region, losing 170,000 soldiers killed and wounded. And the same thing is happening now in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian army is suffering a crushing defeat in this Russian region, rapidly losing not only the occupied territories, but also manpower. It is reported that as of January 17, 2025, the Ukrainian army had lost 53,000 soldiers killed and wounded in the Kursk region. And at the same time, none of the goals were achieved. Thus, the current war in Ukraine has once again proved to the whole world that in the event of a non-nuclear conflict with Russia, the North Atlantic Alliance does not have a chance to win.
the esque these days, and of course, the Ukrainian front
we had done together. But
Hey, Benjamin Netanyahu, please, my God, stop the carnage, and he won't do it. I'm reading that Trump sent some guy named Smitkov or something over there, that the Israelis say, oh, we can't talk to you right now. And he says, shut up. Yes, you can. And he says, it's over. Bye. And he leaves and goes back to Qatar or something. And maybe am I misrepresenting or am I misunderstanding the way this went down? It kind of makes it look like Biden's been full of crap for 16 months and just Trump decided it was over and it was over. Or I don't know. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, we've had this eternal question. I get it all the time. Who's in charge? Is it the Israelis telling the Americans what to do on behalf of Israel? Or is America in charge of Israel, but you have the Israeli lobby controlling America? But basically the implication is that America is 100% subordinated to Israel. Well, that certainly was the case with the Biden administration. I mean, when you have a Secretary of State who stands up and says, I am a Zionist, when you have the President Biden stand up and say, I am a Zionist, and then you're surprised then when they can't get anything done, when they say, we've told the Israelis, but the Israelis talked back. That lets you know who wears the pants in that relationship. We finally have a president-elect, who understands the true nature of this relationship. And I've said this from day one. America can shut Israel down that quick. Israel doesn't exist. The Jewish lobby in America can be shut down that quick. They don't do it because of political expediency. They don't do it because they don't want to put the time and effort into it. But Trump sent a representative over there who sat Netanyahu down and said, shut up and listen. You're done. You're finished. It's over. You don't have a vote. You have no vote. Okay? All that crap you're saying about there to your little constituents in Israel about how you bought American Congress and all that. New sheriff in town. You haven't bought anybody. Wait, what about $100 million that Adelson's widow gave Trump? Don't matter. Shut up. Sit down. You're going to do what we're going to tell you to do, or we're pulling the plug. You'll be out in the street. No, you'll be in jail. Okay? And your little country will collapse. We're not playing this game anymore. This war is over. And guess what? Netanyahu sat down, shut up, and the war looks like it's now he's going to play stupid games. He's playing a stupid game right now. But in 5 days, a envoy from a president-elect accomplished more than Joe Biden accomplished in 16 months. This war could have ended on day one. Look at what the terms of the ceasefire are. The terms of the ceasefire are exactly what Hamas was asking for after October 7th. Exactly. Now, a lot of death and destruction has taken place, but what's emerging here is the fact that it was not Hamas that prevented a ceasefire from ever happening. It was Israel. It was always Israel. It was always Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is going to pay a heavy price for this because
and Trump said it,
hostages, didn't he? Pardon?
Trump said it, didn't he? Didn't Trump say, I saw a video where he was saying, oh, yeah, Israel doesn't want a deal.
Oh, he said that even before Trump did an interview before October 7th where he was talking about Israel. And he said, look, there's two parties to this conflict, and this conflict can only be resolved when they sit down and they talk. He said, but there's one side that doesn't want to talk, and it's Israel. So Trump knew this from the get-go. Trump also has understands Netanyahu, has met Netanyahu, and what he said about Netanyahu in private, I wasn't there, so I'm only repeating what people claim he said about Netanyahu in private, but it isn't complimentary. He doesn't like Netanyahu. There's bad blood there. But the point is, this conflict didn't need to go the way it went. This didn't have to happen. It happened because of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's going to pay a huge price because there are dead hostages. People who would be alive today had Netanyahu simply taken the deal that they have now and done it earlier. But we'll see what happens. All I know is that the Biden administration just exposed itself for being the cooks of Israel. That's a horrible word to use, but it's the only word that matters, counts on this one. Basically, totally submissive to Israel. Trump came in and showed that he has big brass ones, and this is his approach. It's not going to always work. We have the Russian conflict with Ukraine, and if Trump tries this with Russia, I think it'll be a different outcome. But with Israel, he put Netanyahu in its place, and he got a result. Haaretz just wrote an article about it that basically said, the guy came in and told Netanyahu to shut up. This is a situation. Do it. This could have happened on day one. Biden just simply could have sent somebody, not named Tony Blinken or Jake Sullivan, anybody who empowered by the president to tell Netanyahu, sit down and shut up. But the problem is Biden couldn't do that because he didn't have what it takes to stand up to Congress, to stand up to lobbyists, and he would feel the pressure. Trump doesn't care. That's the difference. Trump just doesn't care.
Well, I'll put it like this. It's the difference between I go in a store and I see some kid acting up and some parent going, oh, Bobby, please stop. And Bobby just keeps doing, oh, please stop. And I tell you all this. My dad was a longshoreman. Do you think he asked? Do you think he said, Garland, please stop? He looked at me. That's all he did. If I was doing something, he looked at me. And he gave me that look. And I stopped because I knew he was not much on negotiation. You know what I mean? So, you can't ask. If you ask Netanyahu, of course he's going to say yeah. But I think you and I are on the same page. And I know that you probably got the same thing that I got. Oh no, Israel's in charge of everything. We're subordinate. And I said, no, they got no. Now I will differ you. Let me throw this at you, Scott. I differ a bit with your evaluation that it won't work with Russia. Here's why. Because he ain't going to do it on Russia. He's going to do it in Ukraine. You know what I mean? Because if he says to Israel, you're our puppet, we arm you, we give you money, we give you everything, damn it, stop. You're making us look bad. You're doing stuff we don't want. Stop it. They got to stop. But the analogy for the Russian conflict is Ukraine. We give you everything. We give you money. We give you this. And you stole 90% of it in anyway. We ain't giving you anymore. You know what I mean? The analogy for the Ukraine conflict is both Europe and Ukraine as the puppet state, the one that we empower and control or whatever the hell you said you want. And I think the analogy is this. For all the big talk about Macron and Starmer and all these people that are going to stand up to Trump, when Trump takes power Monday, brother, they're going to fold. And they're going to do a Annalena Baerbock 360, as we call it. The rest of us would call it 180. So what do you think about the analogy that the Europeans and the Ukrainians, they're going to have to fold when Trump comes in, and they're talking a bunch of crap, but they're all going to bend the knee to the ring of the new emperor?
I have no problem with that analogy. My only issue is that Trump isn't surrounded by people who are saying this. Trump is surrounded by people who are saying the exact opposite, that the pressure has to be put on Russia. The articles that are coming out, allegedly based upon the thinking of the Trump team, is that they're going to try to lure Russia into accepting a deal by some sanctions relief, but that if Russia doesn't go along with what they want, which appears to be a ceasefire, a DMZ patrolled by the Europeans, which just isn't going to happen. Not a single European troop will be allowed in Ukraine by Russia. That then they will start targeting Russian oil and energy, not just by targeting Russia, but targeting the nations that buy the oil in an effort to collapse the market and bring Russia down. That has zero chance of working. Now,
but it will raise inflation.
Trump is the president, and so he doesn't have to listen to his advisors. And I hope what happens is that Trump sits down and has his advisors there giving him the stuff, and he says, "Thank you very much." Put Putin on the phone, and he says, "Hey, Mr. President, like to meet soon. Let's set up a
We
date.
want total surrender. Nothing.
Yeah, I'm gonna be drafting something myself. I'm gonna send you a personal letter. You know, he likes personal letters. He sent them to Kim Jong Un. Pissed off pissed off Bolton and Pompeo because they wanted to in the crafting of the letter, but Trump did personal communications. His detractors call them love letters. But the point is, those letters got Trump to have 3 meetings with Kim Jong Un, which, had he not been sabotaged by his advisors, his employees, we would have had a completely different situation in Korea than the one that we face today. I think that Trump can deal with Vladimir Putin as a person, and sit down with Putin and come up with a solution to this problem. But if Trump relies on his advisors on this one, that's over. But again, I'd love to know the background of this, because again, all the people that he brought into his cabinet are pro-Israeli Zionists, foaming at the mouth, anti-Hamas. We're going to deport anybody who dares support Hamas, supports the Palestinian cause, da, 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 da. I think what happened is Trump sent his envoy in on personal instructions and said, just tell him to shut up and sit down. You're speaking on behalf of the man who's going to be president, and dictate the following to them. And that this wasn't coordinated with anybody in Team Trump. And I think that's the way it's going to go forward. Now, reading your comments section, people are like, Scott's saying Trump's good. Guys, you don't listen to a freaking word I say. Okay, those words didn't come out of my mouth. I simply said that Trump sent an envoy in. The envoy sat Benjamin Netanyahu down and read him the Riot Act, and we now have a ceasefire that wasn't going to happen. Is the ceasefire going to work? I don't know. All I know is we have one that could have been done 16 months ago, and Biden didn't make it happen. Trump did. That's all I'm saying. You can read into it any way you choose to. You can claim that you're going to do this, that, and the other thing. I don't care. You do you. I'm simply saying that Donald Trump accomplished in 5 days what Joe Biden couldn't accomplish in 16 months. That's it. Will the ceasefire succeed? Don't know. Is it a sham? Don't know. I'm saying there's a ceasefire. That's it.
Even if it don't last forever, that don't matter to the Palestinian elderly and those kids. They just want a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months without being murdered. That will do them fine. In their mind, they know Israel gonna attack again whenever. They just want some time to heal and get their mind right. So this is a good thing.
And for all you pro-Palestinian people, I'll put that in quote marks because none of you really are. They're dancing in the streets right now in Gaza. They're dancing in the streets. They're happy. You should be happy. The fact that you're not happy when they're happy says everything about you.
Yeah, it's their lives, and they apparently believe something's better. The people in Yemen are saying, yeah, good things are happening. So look, let's roll with it and see what happens. But I'm with you. Look, hey, to me, it's not about even Trump. This is not personal who I like or love. We have positions of justice that we want to see in the world and people's lives saved. And if it's happening and it's good, and Frederick Douglass said, I will join with any man to do good and no man to do evil. That's fair enough. And I also think that something that you said, Scott, and that is about Ukraine and about Trump's policies. And I forgot who I heard say this early, but I think it applies here. Traditionally, what we see is a lot of traditional politicians have cabinet-driven policies, right? They bring in Jake Sullivan and this guy, you bring in Richard Pearl and the Wolfowitz and these guys, and you look at the cabinet and you can judge what the policy of the president, you are what your cabinet says you are, kind of thing, right? To paraphrase a Bill Parcells quote, you are what your record says you are. But big fan of Parcells. I love Parcells. He was great. But at any rate, my point being, the tuna, I don't know where that came from. But my point is, I just don't believe that Trump is going to have a traditional cabinet-driven policy driven by cabinet. Let's not forget, he fires half of his cabinet every 6 months. He goes through 2 or 3 secretaries of state. Rex Tillerson, you forgot about him. He goes through 2 or 3 CIA directors, blah, blah, blah. I think he brings them in, and every now and then they say something that aggravates them, and he fires them. But that Trump is a very top-down policy person, and you can't look at his cabinet and deduce what he's going to do. And I think that confuses people because that's traditional politics. But Trump, and again, I ain't saying he's good or bad. He's not a traditional politician, and you can't analyze what he did based on what Obama or Bush or whoever did.
Yeah, you know, your normal president is a political animal who came up through a system together with a whole bunch of other people. They entered in and they had the political bug. Now, some people take that into a policy direction. Some people take that into an implementation, policy formulation, implementation. But as you rise up through the system, people go out and they either become diplomats, they become soldiers, they become bankers, lawyers, whatever, and they rise up, and it creates what we call the establishment. And your average president is a member of that establishment. And as this person who is going to become president rises, they work with people in the establishment who are like thinkers, people who support their candidacy, support their policies, etc. So by the time they become president, they have taken a selection of that establishment and brought it up with them. And from that, they select a cabinet that's going to support them. Because the idea of a cabinet is to have people help push your policies. All right, that's the normal way it works. And the system's broken because the establishment is inherently corrupt and da-da-da-da-da-da. Trump isn't that person. So the idea that Trump, and he learned this the hard way, round one. Trump came in as president and he was like, well, I don't have an establishment group. So he turned to Chris Christie, if you remember, the head of his transition team. And Chris Christie turned to the Heritage Foundation and others and brought in people who weren't Trump's people. And they tried to create this slice of the establishment that would support. And so Trump went up, brought these people in, and he was betrayed every step of the way by just about everybody, because none of the people there were to promote Trump's policies. They were there to promote the policies of the establishment that Trump was trying to unravel. This time, I think Trump has learned his lesson. I love the fact that so many traditional members of Congress, especially the Senate that does confirmation, are so upset with the nominees he's brought in. And some of their,
me too.
To be honest, some of their criticism is legitimate. I'm not saying these guys are perfect, but I love the fact that Trump went, I don't care. You see, I'm creating my cabinet, and it's not your cabinet. It's not the establishment's cabinet. It's my, because all the senators that are critical of Trump are from the establishment. These are people that tried to rise to the top. They didn't quite have that presidential push, so they leveled out at senator, which is pretty good. But that's where they're at. They are the establishment. And now they're sitting there going, we don't want a cabinet that doesn't think like us, that doesn't reflect what we want. And Trump's saying, that's not the game I'm playing. Now, what game is Trump playing? I spent a lot of time studying Vladimir Putin. I've been watching him for 25 years and study how he works. And I look at his leadership style. I take a look at how he travels around and meets with governors and people and listens, he talks. So you get a feel that when a decision is made by Putin, you have an understanding, at least I do, of how that decision was made, the processes. And that's why I don't buy into this dictator and oligarch and all this nonsense. I recognize him as a leader of a Russian way of doing business. Study Donald Trump. Now you say, well, how do I study Donald Trump? What data is out there? I'll give you the easiest one. What is it? 15 seasons of The Apprentice.
Yeah. Yep.
Watch The Apprentice and see how this man works. Look at what he does. First of all, he doesn't have an establishment mindset. He has a corporate mindset. And he comes in and he says, I'm going to take these people who all are pushing for this one thing, and I'm going to split them into teams, and then the teams are going to compete against each other. And from that, I learn how people think. I learn what people do. He's not doing it to have them advise. It's a game for him. It's sort of like Squid Game or whatever the hell that Korean show is where everybody gets popped. But he watches that, and then the losing team he takes apart and he fires people. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. But in the process, he's learned about these people and they've learned about him. So in the end, the teams that as they survive, they've learned what Trump wants. And so they modify how they behave. So by the time you get to the final people, they're doing what Trump wants them to do. I think this is Donald Trump's cabinet. They're not there to advise Trump. They're there to play a stupid game of Donald Trump, presidential apprentice. And Trump will do what Trump wants to do. But he wants people working for him, not with him. They work for him to do what Trump wants to do. They're not there to advise him. Trump doesn't want advice. Trump wants to accomplish a task, and he needs people capable of helping him accomplish that task. And so we're going to be seeing 4 years of The Apprentice. That's Trump's leadership style. Will it work? I don't know. Do I think it's great? I'm not comfortable with it. I'm a traditionalist. I'd like America to actually be a nation where we have an establishment focused on what's best for America, not what's best for corporate interests and things of that nature. But that's not who we got as president right now. We've got somebody totally different. And I think we're going to be in for a totally different experience over the next 4 years.
As somebody said in the chat, nothing could be worse than Biden. Nothing could be worse than Biden, where every morning you're looking out the window to see if you see a flash of a nuclear, explosion every day. You're like, if we can just make it till Monday. The last few days,
that you mentioned that. I just want to. I'm glad you said that. Yesterday, I had a 2-hour conversation with Dmitry Trenin, who is a senior. He used to head up the Carnegie Endowment for Peace in Moscow. He used to be part of the back when America and Russia were talking about partnership. He was the man that was making the partnership work. But he has the ear of Vladimir Putin. He is a man of substance in Russia. Because we've collaborated together on trying to stop nuclear war over the course of the last year. And I was saying over and over again how close we were to nuclear war, And there's a lot of people out there who are going, Scotty, calm down. It's not as bad. No, you're exaggerating. Trenin yesterday said America will never understand how close they came to having not just one time, not just twice, but at least 3 times a nuclear war, how absolutely close we came. Putin, he said, was under more pressure than you can possibly imagine from the Russian system that said they have crossed every red line. And if we don't stop them now, it will be the end of us. We must act now. We must use nuclear weapons. Guys, we are so lucky to be alive today. And it's not because of anything that happened here in the United States. It's simply because Putin decided that he wasn't going to push the button. But we were provoking him so much. The Biden administration almost killed everybody. And Kamala Harris, had she been elected, would have killed everybody. We have this president in now that none of us really understand. We're not experts on Donald Trump. I don't think there is an expert on Donald Trump. We're trying to figure out who this guy is. But all I know is that he doesn't want a nuclear war. And he has articulated that. And that helps me sleep easy at night.
I felt the same thing on a number of occasions, because this is what I always think. What would I do? Right. And I think to myself, I thought to myself on a number of occasions, if I were the Russians, I'd have to be thinking about a nuclear attack. You would do the same way. If you were the president of Russia, there were a number of occasions where you would have to think it. And if you did it, there's only one option: a massive decapitation strike, preemptive. That's the only option. And at times, if I were president, I wouldn't have done it, I'm sure, of course, as Putin, because I wouldn't want to end it. But I would have had to consider a complete and total decapitation strike of America, figuring, okay, they've lost their minds, they're going to try to kill us. That's the only way. So luckily, so far, we got a few more days. Fingers crossed, We might make it out of this thing. Now, let me do that, which brings us right here. I did a video. Oh, by the way, I'm going to go back and find that and put this up. I did a video maybe a year ago, a bunch of months back, and I said, will Vladimir Putin and President Xi save the world? And I talked about the world, it will survive, get through the Biden administration by their grace, because they choose not to kill us all, not to act. Now, that brings me right here, Scott. I just did this video yesterday. You'll love this. Look at this. NATO is finished. We got a zombie in a military outfit with a NATO flag, right? And my argument is kind of like there was a zombie movie where this woman's running through the streets trying to, a zombie apocalypse, and she's trying to find her. I've got to get to my friends' apartments to make sure they're okay. She finally gets there. She opens the door, and they all run from her, and we find out that she was a zombie the whole time. She just didn't know it. Right. right. It was an interesting end to the movie. Right. She's like, she goes to hug. They're like, they all go run away, and they show her. She's like blue and green. Right. Now, here's my point. That's how I see NATO. They're zombie. How do they? Look, you got Mark Rutte. We're going to have to give 5% of our 10% of our GDP. And I thought, these bastards are so broke. 5% of their GDP in the next year or two after they've been industrialized ain't going to be enough to buy a Happy Meal. At any rate, my argument, NATO is finished, zombie, done. I do not see how they survive this conflict. One other thing, because the people are going to be so furious, they're going to be ready to Luigi their bosses. Anyway, Scott, their leaders.
Well, we already see, let's start with the Luigiing of their leaders. Look at Germany. The government has collapsed largely because of the policy stances they've taken in relationship to NATO-driven policies, such as the sanctioning of Russia, providing unfettered support for Ukraine. There will be an election in February, March. I don't know. Is it February
20th? Almost exactly a month after Trump comes to power, and I think that's going to have an effect on things. I might add.
And this election, right now the Christian Democratic Party has a slight lead, but the momentum is with Alternative for Deutschland, who has said that if they are empowered, they will withdraw from the European Union. The European Union is the political fabric around which the current iteration of NATO has been placed. The two can't survive without the other. So if European Union collapses, NATO collapses. If NATO collapses, the European Union collapses. Sticking with Germany, they last year, in 2022, the German government of Olaf Scholz, the one that just failed, said we have to rebuild our military in response to the new reality of what's happened in Ukraine. We need 100 billion euro. It's a lot of euro to rebuild their military, and they got the money. Last year, Pistorius, the defense minister, goes to the parliament and says, "Yeah, we need to talk about the budget. We need to increase spending by, I forget what it was, 7, 8, 9%. It was a number. That 100 billion he gave us, it's gone. Well, where's the military? Well, we didn't really accomplish much with it, you see, because Germany was so fundamentally broken. It's like buying, there's that old Ted Danson movie, The Money Pit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Ted Danson movie, but Goldie Hawn might be in it. I don't know. But the bottom line is they buy this house, and they try to fix it, and you're just pouring money in, and nothing's happening. The house is not getting fixed because it's so fundamentally broken. They poured $100 billion into the German military, and it's broken, still broken. So they say, we need more money to continue these projects. And the parliament came back and went, we don't have that money. You see, we're broke. We're flat ass broke. We're going to give you, I don't know, 1.6%, which is less than inflation. So at a time when the German military is saying, we got to flex our muscles, be strong, stand up, they're actually shrinking because they don't have enough money. So the German military is shrinking. All of the major militaries in Europe are shrinking. The British, who talk the loudest, shrinking. The French, pathetic. everything. They can't afford it. Now you have Rutte, who, just so everybody knows, I'm on record saying this, when he became the Secretary General, I said he will be the last Secretary General of NATO. He's it. Rutte's come out and said a couple interesting things. The most interesting one is the one that drives everything else. He said that the Russian defense industry produces more in 3 months than all of NATO's defense industry, including the United States, produces in a year.
That's the fact.
So understanding that means that you have to, in order to compete with Russia, you have to completely mobilize or transition your industry into the defense industry.
Russia.
Under the best of circumstances, this is a horribly expensive proposition. And it has a detrimental impact on your overall economy. But these aren't the best of circumstances because there is no economy in Europe today. So there's nothing that you can bring in. So all these numbers that he throws out there, we've been trying to get to 2%, but now he says we have to get to 5%. Well, there's a reason why you couldn't get to 2%. Now you want to get to 5%. And then he says if the United States withdraws, in order for Europe to build its own military alliance, we have to get to 10% of GDP. And to do that, to get to 5%, he's saying we need you to cut pensions. We need you to end social programs. We need you to basically gut your own people to build this military. Europe will reject this wholeheartedly, and we see that. We see Romania rejecting it. We see the Czech Republic rejecting it. Hungary's already rejected it. Slovakia's rejected it. Germany's rejecting it. France will reject it. The British, who knows what's going to happen with their elections, they're going to reject it. Europe can't do this. This is the end of NATO. And Trump comes in saying that he's already inclined to withdraw from NATO. He will, I believe, give NATO a chance to say, if you want to be a military organization, you got to put the money up now. NATO won't be able to do that. And they'll say, then we're done. We're unplugged and we're out of there, and NATO will collapse. Mark Rutte will be the last Secretary General of NATO. NATO is a zombie right now, literally a zombie. It has zero meaningful military capability. Zero. They can't project power. I challenge NATO right now, in a week's time, to send 60,000 combat-capable troops into Ukraine. In a week's time. You have that rapid deployment thing you guys were doing, right? Right, Rutte? Oh, that was Stoltenberg. I'm sorry, Stoltenberg did it. But you inherited it, right, Rutte? You got 300,000 guys ready to rock and roll right now. Oh, it's not 300,000. It's 70,000. And most of those are Turks. Good luck getting the Turks into Ukraine.
Right.
NATO
the
is nothing.
The Russians.
NATO is nothing. Zero. Nothing. And that's just the reality. And it will never be anything. It used to be something, but today it's nothing. It's a shell. It's basically a giant residence that has been allowed to get black mold and the foundations rotten and the termites are in the wood and every problem you could have in a home, pipes leaking. It means that the only way you fix this is to tear the whole house down and start over. And then maybe you have to build a house that you can sustain within your budget. You can't sit there and say, well, we're going to build $1 million mansion, but I got $100,000 house budget. You got to build the house that you want, which means you got to be realistic about the world you live in. And Europe has to stop this nonsense about standing up and fighting Russia, about Russia's going to invade. Therefore, we need to build a military capable of withstanding a Russian invasion. Russia's not going to invade anything. Nothing. Russia doesn't want to. Russia can't. I mean, I know Russia has this great military, but come on, guys. Russia's put 900,000 troops into Ukraine, and look at the slow rate of advance there.
What are they going to occupy all of Europe with troops?
And now you're saying
how many
that
troops would it take to occupy all of Europe? The whole
it would
Russian, you know what I mean?
15%. It would take 15% of Russia's total population.
Exactly.
15 million soldiers to do that. Russia's not doing that game. That's not the game they want to play. Russia's in the business of, reviving its economy, becoming doing diplomacy. Russia doesn't lead with its military. Russia leads with Lavrov. You know, and
I don't know about this spot. I don't, Scott. I don't know if you saw the introduction to the Paris Olympics, but trust me when I tell you this: Russia does not want Western Europe.
Right, Russia doesn't want to be in Paris. Not the way
They
it is
don't
right
want
now.
like blue guys in dresses and beards dancing around. They don't like that stuff in Moscow.
Yeah, no. Look, Russia's not looking for a fight with Europe. Russia just wants to live in peace. But Russia recognizes that Europe has been problematic for it. And as long as NATO exists, Russia has to create spheres of interest. They have to create buffers. Those buffers traditionally included neutral nations like Finland. Huge mistake for Finland to join NATO. You joined in. I love it when people go, well, NATO's expanding. Finland and Sweden. Well, they'll be the shortest term members of a failed organization ever. What happens when NATO does collapse in 5 years? How's Finland and Sweden looking now? So no, I agree with you that NATO is a zombie organization, and I say this somebody I actually have a family member who works for NATO, and he's a European senior position in NATO, and I don't like the idea of him becoming unemployed, but they'll find way else to employ people, but NATO is an organization that has no legitimate function today. It's a very dangerous organization because in order to sustain it, you need conflict. And the only place they can plug in on conflict is Russia. And a conflict between NATO and Russia has the potential of going nuclear and killing us all. So for all the Americans out there saying, well, no, we have to hold on to NATO because we've been doing that for 80 years. It's a poison pill. And if we keep that poison pill in our mouth, one of these days we're going to bite on it. It's going to kill us.
Yeah, and Europe is it's rotting from the inside out. You know what I mean? It's rotting. Their issue is not going to be right now. They're still playing the narrative. The narrative is we're united. Joe Biden, no, we're more united than ever, and we're united to defend ourselves from Russia internally. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what happened in Romania, but they basically overthrew the government of Romania. And then one of these EU people was recently filmed talking, saying, basically we did that in Romania and we'll do it in Germany too. But there's like hundreds of thousands of people in the street in Romania. I even think this, based on what happened in Georgia, that there are a lot of other countries that would be facing some kind of a similar, coup, that are looked at the Georgians and said, darn it, they did it. That's the problem with an example. You know what I mean? They did it. And the Romanians are like, they did it, and they didn't get overthrown. And now I don't think the Romanians are going to sit still and allow the EU to overthrow their government. And I think at some point, this guy, Georgescu or whatever his name, it's going to be hard for the people in power in Romania to keep him out of power. And he's another one that says, I can't stand NATO and the EU.
Yeah. No, I mean, they had presidential elections, and he did surprisingly well, unexpectedly well in the first round, and survived it, moved in, and they were literally setting up the second round of elections, would have been the final round. And polls had him winning hands down. When the European/NATO intelligence went to Romanian intelligence and said, we think the Russians interfered with the first round. Talking about TikTok.
On TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok videos and all that. And then they took it to the court, and the court went, oh my God, we have to first they stopped the election, then they annulled the first round of elections. But now the courts come out and said, yeah, there wasn't any evidence. We looked at it and it didn't happen. But they're not reversing their decision. So you have hundreds of thousands of Romanians in the street. Many of them are supporters of this gentleman whose name you did a better job of pronouncing than I ever will, Gorgescu or something of that nature. Yeah. It's not his fault. It's my ignorance. I just want the Romanians to know out there that I'm not making fun of Romanian names or anything like that. I'm just professing the fact that I can't pronounce it. It's not your fault. It's my fault. But the people in the streets, about 20% of the people in the streets don't want him to be president. They're part of the opposition, but they say this is a democracy. You can't do that. You're not allowed to intervene like that. We want an election. if he wins the election, that's democracy. But we want the election without any interference on the part of the court. So we'll see the direction this goes. Romania is in a state of crisis right now. But if he becomes the president, it's bad news for NATO, because if you take a look at all the talk that's out there about sending a NATO corps in there and stuff, you basically have two vectors into Ukraine from NATO. You have the Polish vector, and then you have a Romanian vector. Both are capable of providing the entree of NATO forces, the logistics, sustainability, port facilities, rail connectivity, airfields, etc. But if you're going to, one of the areas that they've always talked about, the French, that we're going to protect Odessa from the Russians. And so they're going to send their 60,000 strong corps through Romania in there, and that's their lifeline. And the Romanian president's going, nah, we're hitting the off switch. And suddenly, even if NATO could project power in Ukraine, which they can't, and do you really want to initiate something? Let's say they could, and they initiated something through Romania, and the Romanian president comes in and goes, off switch, we're done. We're not playing that. All the stupidity, who's really feeling pretty stupid right now? Sansu, the president of Moldova, who has fed off of the current Romanian administration into posturing herself to be this anti-Russian force, and speaking strong about Transnistria, etc. And Romania might get a president that's going to say off switch, and now she's going to be out there all by herself, exposed with no support. In Europe, I think the Czech Republic just had an election where their president, or somebody just had an election. I thought it was the Czech Republic, where a new president or the current president has changed their attitude. They're changing their mind about this. Austria just brought in a right wing.
I think maybe Czechoslovakia. You got Austria. But bottom line, it seems like most of that Eastern European area, which makes sense because they're the ones that would be smushed first in a, you know what I mean? A war starts, they're the ones that get hit first. But it seems like country after country in the U.S., I always bring this up, Scott, when this war first started. Scott Ritter came on the critical hour with Garland Nixon and Dr. Wilmer Leon within the first few weeks and said, none of these administrations in any of these countries in Europe are going to survive, and they are falling quickly. And I suspect, Scott, that if there's some kind of deal that goes down, the people will get even angrier, because they were told, we have to do this, because if we don't, the Russians will keep coming. And if there's a deal and the Russians don't keep coming, then they're going to have to ask, what was this all for? That's a bad question for the people who have been running this thing in Europe.
Revolutionary change is what I said. There will be revolutionary change in Europe, and we're seeing it. The thing that I said that would trigger it is the economic blowback. Remember, I was saying this before we knew, because at that time everyone was saying, no, the sanctions are going to bring the Russians down to their knees. I said, no, you have fundamentally no understanding of the politics of energy. These sanctions are going to destroy Europe. And in doing so, when they blow back, the European economies will collapse. And when they collapse, the social structures that empower these political and economic elites will collapse, and there will be revolutionary change. Every single one of these leaders who started at the top encouraging this policy will fall. And we're seeing them right now. It's like dominoes, click, 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 click. Macron is in very, very hot water right now. There was a while ago where, I don't know what you think about Justin Trudeau. I'm not a fan. But there's a while ago though that did you really think that Trudeau was going to resign in disgrace? No, everybody's just like, no, he's a pathetic Canadian leader, and the Canadians will continue to foster his pathetic. Sort of like France and Macron. I mean, Macron is the walking, talking embodiment of incompetence. And yet he's like this permanent president of France. Not that permanent. I think that Macron is going to resign sooner rather than later, because he can't. France is a failed experiment, and it's his experiment that has failed. Just like Canada is a failed experiment. It was Trudeau's experiment. It failed. Trudeau had to resign. He had no choice because it failed. Macron's on his way out too. And when France goes, the government that will come in is going to be Le Pen's government. The far and watch complete. And you know who I feel sorry for, sort of, is Giorgia Meloni, the Italian premier, because she knows what side she wants to be on, but she was a political realist, and she played what she called the safe bet, which is she came in and she said, well, I'm going to play the European Union and NATO game because that's what everybody's playing. And she sort of stepped in there and she's out there dancing with them and all that. And now she's looking around going, oh, damn it, I did the wrong thing. I should have been Giorgia Meloni from the start. I should have been on the side. I should have been railing against this because now I'd be the leader of Europe. But she still has some potential. That's why she went to Mar-a-Lago. I think that's why she's talking to Trump. So I put her to the side, but Italian politics, even in the best of times, that's why we make fun of what we call the Italian parliament, because you can't keep a government in place because there's so many constituencies and collapse. I don't know what her future will be, but her future will be, I think, driven by Italian realities, not European realities. So she's immune, I think, from the other things that are going on in Europe. Italy hasn't overcommitted itself to Ukraine politically, economically, or militarily. So there's, I take Italy as the major European nations. I put Italy to the side, but everyone else, done. They're all going to fall.
Yeah, a friend of mine was in Greece recently, and he said he was surprised because, there's a strong history of a lot of socialists and communists in Greece. And he said he knew a lot of people that in his family, right? And he said they were very pro-Trump. And he said it wasn't ideological at all. Well, I'm sure the Greeks are Orthodox Christians and traditionally very close to the Russians, very anti-fascist. They do not like the Nazis. And he said it was basically, hey, Trump wants to hopefully stop the war. And so they were supporting his foreign policy. So they were all hoping for him to win. This was, I think, right around the election, or happy because he won, whatever. And he said he was surprised when he got there. But at any rate, let us continue. The front line. I saw, who was it that said that tweet? No, was it Glenn Deason, I believe, who said the Russians are 6.5 kilometers from
Dnipropetrovsk.
Dnipropetrovsk, yeah. What the heck did that? I don't know what that really means, or I can't even pronounce the well enough to say to make something up for that word. But I put it like this: it don't sound good for the Ukrainians with all this business about we want to negotiate from a position of strength. And my understanding is in that particular country, even in that particular area, they don't have any really entrenched defenses. So when the Russians get there, they can kind of walk through. Sounds like things are looking kind of bleak these days. I'm reading a lot about soldiers walking away, leaving, running, holding up the white flag. Just sounds like we're seeing a slow collapse. And here's my thought. I'll throw this at you, Scott. One last thing. If you're fighting in a war and Monday Trump comes in and this guy wants out as quickly as possible, and I'm standing out here and I might die, not to defend my position or to defend, the guys that are around me, we're all a team. None of that. It's now, this is a lost cause. The new president comes in and says he's going to end it any day. I'm not defending any damn thing. I'm just out here to die. I got to think that it's going to have a material effect on the people that are out there fighting, knowing that Trump just came in, he hates Zelensky, and he wants this damn war over. You got nobody backing you, Scott.
Again, I'm not on the front line, so I can't speak about when I was on the front line with the Ukrainian soldiers. Can't do that. Can't even say it with the Russians. When I tried to go on the front line with the Russian soldiers, the Ministry of Defense wouldn't let me get anywhere near the front line. They're like, no, old man, stay back in there. We don't want you killed. But what I'll say this is the Russians have a system right now where their troops go forward, they fight, then they rotate. When they go back, they rotate into comfortable positions where they can shower, they can eat, they can rest. Some of them get to go home for a brief leave. But while they're there, they get to, read the internet, read the news. So I imagine that there's conversations in the Russian units that have the characteristic of what you're talking about. What's going to happen when Trump comes in? Look, I know I interface with a lot of Russian soldiers who, when they go into the rear areas, get on my Telegram channel, reach out and talk and stuff like that before they rotate back in where they're not supposed to be. And I talk to Russian reporters who do the same thing. So I think I have an understanding of sort of the intellectual climate of the Russian army, where they are aware of the world situation and is cognizant. Now, Ukrainians, from what I'm getting, just looking at the discussions with prisoners of war, discussion with the soldiers, they're basically rushed to the front line in a deteriorating situation, a fluid situation. The Russians have broken through. We want you to defend this tree line. We dump you off in the middle of the night, dig your trenches, dig in, and we'll come and relieve you in 5 days. When 5 days come, they're not getting relieved. While they're there for 5 days, they're getting shelled. There's no connectivity. They're hungry. There's no political conversation taking place in that trench. They're not sitting there going, what do you think? When Donald Trump comes in, they're sitting there freezing, hungry, shelled, tired, exhausted, and stuff. And then when they get pulled out, it's chaos, etc. They're almost always put right back in. This is why they're collapsing. They're failing. I think the Ukrainians are going to fail, not because Donald Trump's going to become president and their morale is collapsed. They're going to fail because their system is no longer functioning. There's a reason why the Russians are advancing steadily across the front line. This isn't localized advances. The Ukrainians right now cannot sustain cohesive defense along the totality of the line of conflict, and the Russians are very cleverly picking them apart. Look, Marek Karelin runs a reporter, does a fantastic Substack page. I encourage everybody to go there, and he's got a partner that does these very good maps. When I talked to him about it, he said initially the maps were too good. And the Russian command came down and said, you got to dumb your maps up a little bit because you're giving away the whole farm here. And so they've dumbed the maps up, but they're a good depiction of the reality of it. And the front, I can't keep track of it because I look at the map and I'm used to every day, for years looking at Advievka and other places, and you got a little arrow here, then you get a blue arrow counterattacking and minor movement. But so I'm looking at the names there, trying to look at things. And then I come back in a week and they're up here. I said, well, what happened here? No, they've moved up there. The Ukrainian defenses that existed from 2014 on, these heavily fortified, they're gone. Their backup defenses are gone. They're now moving into new defenses, some of which are manned. Look at the situation around Pokrovsk. They've built some, but they're running out of manpower, and that's collapsing. Chasiv Yar, I think the Russians made a major penetration into Chasiv Yar, seizing a heavily fortified center area that's going to lead to that collapse. Dnipropetrovsk is an oblast or a region of Ukraine where they haven't been preparing for war. There's no defenses there, none. And so if the Russians get into that, they're now able to move, and now the arrows, I've always said the Russians aren't doing big arrow warfare, but now you have the potential for the Russians to actually do a big arrow that can now sweep in and threaten a large cutoff of Ukraine forces, compelling a major withdrawal. This war is going south. And it has nothing to do with Donald Trump coming in. It has everything to do with the Russians executing a plan, a war of attrition. The key to a war of attrition is to understand that it's not designed to get the big arrow results. It's designed to grind the enemy down to the point where the enemy can no longer defend, and then you can push them and they collapse. The Russians have won the war of attrition. And right now, Ukraine is in a situation, and this is why Russia will never accept, in my opinion, a ceasefire. Because what the Russians have accomplished here is it didn't happen overnight. And it requires, it's a systemic thing. It's not just about the front line, because the front line is just the tip of what's going on. The front line where they're engaging, closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower maneuver is about, killing soldiers and destroying equipment. But then you have the system of replacing soldiers and replacing equipment. And so there's that so there's the kill factor, and then there's the sustainment factor. And the Russians have shown that they have the ability to sustain the killing potential. The Ukrainians used to be able to match that, and that's why the lines didn't move that much. But now Ukraine can't. So the Ukrainians have to adapt. They have to withdraw to buy time to get more troops in. Meanwhile, behind that is what's going on in NATO and what's going on in terms of Congress and money. There's the big picture stuff. The Ukrainian system is so far behind the power curve that as long as the Russians keep the pressure on them, they'll never catch up. It's a permanent situation of unable to keep up with the Russians. The moment the Russians let up, the moment that they say, oh, we're going to have a ceasefire, Ukrainians catch up.
Right.
Suddenly they get that surge, they catch up, and now Russia, it's a reset. It's like playing a video game. I'm trying to identify with the modern crowd here. Playing a video game where you're fighting your way to the final boss, but then there's a glitch and you have to start all over. That's what will happen to the Russians if there's a ceasefire. If there's a ceasefire, it's a reset. This is why any notion of a peace treaty that says we're going to freeze it in place and buy time, all you're saying is that it's a reset and Russia's going to have to start all over again, maybe in a more disadvantaged position. Russia right now has won this war. They really have. The war's over. If as long as Russia keeps putting this pressure on and they can sustain this for a long time, Ukraine will continue to withdraw, retreat, collapse. NATO can't keep up. The United States politically can't keep up. But if you provide a pause where something sacrifice isn't being asked to make, I can now, it's like getting behind in payments, in debt. You have an income and you have debt. And if your income can't match the debt, you're screwed because the bills keep piling up and you run out of money and things happen and all that. But if the bank said 4 months, you don't have to make any payments. That 4 months, I can build money up. I can start into, so when the next time comes, I'm not in that panic situation. I'm now balanced my budget and all that. A ceasefire is allowing the West to balance its budget, to get its act together. Russia can't afford to do that, or else they've lost the war. That's the one way Russia can lose this war. Russia could lose this war by not winning this war.
Right. Well, I'll put it like this: if two people fighting, a pause is always going to benefit the person that's losing. If you're winning, you don't want to pause. You're getting, you got the guy down and you're pummeling on the face. Can we take a time? No.
It's like boxing. It's like boxing. You get to the end of the round, you're like, boom, 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 boom. And the other guy's, oh, God, but ding, ding, ding. Oh, I get to go in.
Yep.
Then you come out and, but boxing is a war of attrition too, because by the 15th round, usually one side's down. Yep. But yeah, you're right. You give a pause, they refresh.
You got them on the ropes. Can we take a few minutes off? No.
No.
You know what? You can lay down and we can do a TKO. You can call the ref over and say, I uncle. That's the only option. Otherwise,
waving it off. The fight's over.
Exactly. Tap out. That we can do that.
Yeah.
That's where we are. Yeah, I think they're done. The other, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, Scott Ritter, and let me find it. I want to ask you about this. Oh, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Asia. I don't know if you followed it. This was with the whole South Korea president thing. He's finally been arrested, right? And it is, the more you look into it, it's blatantly obvious that Sullivan Blinken did this. The guy says, all right, I'm going to take over, martial law. And we find out now that he was actually going to start a war with North Korea. That he had a bunch of people and they were going to do a false flag and fire it in North Korea, that they were going to kidnap the opposition. I mean, this is madness. And they were able to hold off, and now he's finally been arrested, right? I kind of got a feeling they left this guy out on a limb. I'll put it like this. If Blinken and those guys think we got you covered, they're gone Monday. And this guy's arrested, and he's done this, and he's been nabbed by the South Koreans. It ain't going to look good for him. Here's why I say that. I think he's going to sing. And I think, Scott, there's people in the Pentagon, there's people in the intelligence community, the State Department people have already started saying Biden told us to shut up and we weren't allowed to talk about Gaza. Here's a prediction. People are going to come out and sing like pigeons about things that were going on in the Biden administration that will be shocking to the conscience of the American people and the world. Scott.
Yeah. I just want to remind everybody that it was just this past spring that Biden brought early summer. He brought the South Korean president and the Japanese prime minister into the White House. He forgot. You remember? I mean, because he was brain dead by then, and he misrepresented him and all this. But he was the South Korean president sang to him. It was a love fest. They created this trilateral relationship. It sounds cool, but let's think for a second, Garland, what you just said. This guy was going to start a false flag war with North Korea. All right. Now, this is the guy that Biden sat down and said, we're going to start doing joint nuclear war planning with you. We're going to take an American boomer. That's a submarine with ballistic missiles on it, and we're going to park it in a South Korean port as a show of strength, because we're trying to create the impression that we are prepared to defend you, and we want the North Koreans to understand that. So we gave a boomer to a South Korean president that was going to start a false flag war with North Korea. Do you guys understand how freaking stupid and dangerous this is? This is American policy under Biden in a nutshell. It's all a facade. It's all a lie. Everything. This is like, me. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with an analogy that like me and my neighbor saying, "Hey, why don't we do a joint project in that little piece of property there? We'll make a park and we'll attract families and all this stuff." And all of a sudden the police raid their house, and you find out down in the basement the man's a mass murderer, serial killer with a torture chamber, and you're going, what the heck? But the worst thing is the Biden administration says, well, we know he's a mass murderer, torture, he's got a torture chamber, but we're still going to do the project as if everything's normal anyways. South Korea is a fundamentally broken nation. Anybody who's been studying South Korea for years knows that it's not a democracy. It's this weird little thing of power elites. The military is in control, and it exists for one reason and one reason only: to unify with the North through force if necessary. That is the mission statement of South Korea. It's not to thrive as an economically independent democracy. It exists to capture the North. And if you don't know what Kim Jong-un just did this past year, then you don't understand why this South Korean president is doing what he's doing. Kim Jong-un woke up and said, I'm no longer interested in unification with the South. We would like to end the state of war, but this is not a demilitarized zone, not a ceasefire line. It is a permanent border separating you from me. I don't want to have anything to do with you guys ever again, because he knows the sickness of the South. And he blew up the roads and he blew up the trail, and you saw the South Koreans panic. You can't do that. You can't pull the plug on us, because then we no longer have a reason to exist. We only exist to forcefully take you over. And we can only do that if you believe that you want unification, if unification is the goal of all you Koreans. And Kim Jong-un said, no, it's not our goal anymore. We have no desire to be part of you. You rot in hell. We're going to Russia, and we're going to fix all of our problems. And the South Koreans went into an absolute flat-out panic. And that's why this happened. There's no other reason for him to want to start a fake war and all this stuff. It's because South Korea no longer has a legitimate reason to exist. And you watch, South Korea is going to go into a free fall spin collapse because this is a sickness. The people that are prosecuting them, half of them don't know what they're doing. I'm not talking about the law here. They're scared. The South Koreans are scared. What are we to do? Since our creation, and remember, if you guys study the North Korean War and all that, the guys who were the bad guys weren't the guys in the North. Syngman Rhee, and we're talking about a dictator, brutal thug. The South were not the good guys here. The North was more Korean than the South. The South was a tool
it was military dictatorship up until like 89.
Yeah,
Officially.
well, it still is a military dictatorship because the military controls everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is fascinating stuff. I had to laugh. I saw something that the South Korean president was in a convoy driving to the prosecutor's office, and it sort of reminded me of like O.J. Simpson, you know?
Yeah, was he in a white Bronco?
Yeah, white Bronco going down the thing. I'm like, okay, well, this is the South Korean version of O.J. Simpson, but no, South Korea is a fundamentally broken nation. I feel sorry for the people because they're not well served by their leadership. Again,
I think
it's
it
like
creates an opening, doesn't it? I think it creates a political opening in a way because the South Korean people, I will say this, them and their politicians were very brave and they fought through this thing. You got to give them a lot of credit. But now Trump's coming to power. If Trump says, I want to meet with Kim Jong-un and try to get some kind of a deal after the frightful situations that they've been through, I have to think that there'll be more support for it. I have met with some of the South Korean and spoken at some events for some of the South Korean peace groups here in the United States, Korean peace groups. And let me first say this. They were very pro-Trump, very pro-Trump. This was a couple of years ago, and specifically because they wanted a deal because they had family on both sides. There's going to be tremendous support in South Korea, particularly now, if Donald Trump says, I want to meet with Kim Jong-un. Not that he'll be able to get a deal. And might I add, Russia's hardening up North Korea in a way that they'll be able to further protect themselves. They're hardening up Iran in a way that, who knows, maybe the Trump people, instead of attacking Iran, which doesn't seem likely now, will say, hey, I want a nuclear deal with Iran. The table could be set by the neocons for some of these deals.
There's plenty of opportunity there. What we can say is that Trump has inherited a global climate that because of the failures across the board of the rules-based international order and all that, opportunities exist. The question is Trump capable of taking advantage of that? I think you're 100% right. What is one of the first things Trump did when he's trying to improve relations with Koreans? Stop the military nonsense, stop the exercises, stop the provocation, stop the whole thing, because he understood the problem. And remember this, Trump has met Kim Jong-un. He has talked with Kim Jong-un. They exchanged love letters. So he knows Kim Jong-un. When Trump says, I know a foreign leader, this is one of the few times I actually believe he actually does have insight into Kim Jong-un. So the day of the denuclearization is over.
Right.
You're not going to denuclearize North Korea. But what you can do is get a peace treaty. And what you can do is end the state of war, which is the first step if you ever want to begin the process of taking things down. If you ever want to get North Korea to talk about, giving up its nuclear arsenal, or at least lowering the nuclear arsenal, you have to start from peace, stability. Trump now has an important card to play with the South Koreans and the Japanese. The frickin' South Korean president almost took us to a nuclear war without consulting us on his own volition. That's unacceptable. And so bring it down. I think you're right. There is an opportunity here for a deal to be made. Look, I've said this. I'm going to watch me throw your chat into.
Yeah, they're fun.
This is going to be fun.
Let's freak out the chat. I'm all for that.
Trump, by bringing about this ceasefire, has done more to earn the Nobel Peace Prize than Barack Obama ever did. Trump has the potential of ending the conflict, or at least help facilitating an end to the conflict in Ukraine. That alone is worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize. Trump can go and bring peace to North Korea. You know who got a peace to end the Russo-Japanese war? You know who got the Nobel Peace Prize? Teddy Roosevelt. All right, for ending the Russian-Japanese war. Trump can go in and bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. Only Trump can do this. Biden couldn't do it. Biden created the problems. Biden created Ukraine. Biden created or wouldn't end this. These are all problems created. Taiwan and China. Trump can end that. And
Iran.
literally,
He can
100
deal
days.
with Iran.
And
The Iranians,
Iran,
I just saw the president the other day, and the Iranians are saying, yeah, we're ready to talk.
We're ready to talk. So literally in 100 days, it might take a little bit longer. Trump can end 5 of the most dangerous hotspots in the world. He can bring it to an end. That's worthy of 5 Nobel Peace Prizes.
I agree.
They need and again, I mean, I think it would be hilarious to have Trump go to Sweden and pick up the Nobel Peace Prize. That would be the funniest acceptance speech that will ever been delivered in history, because he's an arrogant prick, and it will be just beautiful. But he'll never get it because they won't nominate him, because everybody hates Trump, hates him. But whatever you think about this guy, I'm not here defending his narcissism, his behavior towards women. I'm not defending any of that. In 100 days, Donald Trump can do what no American president in recent history even tried to do: end every single one of these hot spots and bring some sort of peace and stability to the world. And I don't know who you are, where you stand politically. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Well, I know we got to go in a second, but I got to end with saying this. Donald Trump recently said, I said I'm going to meet with Putin. He said, yeah, I should meet with Putin and Xi. We're the 3 most powerful people in the world, and we should have a world power summit. I agree. But here's the other
I like
part
that
of it. Yeah, I love that. Here's the thing about it. If you think about it, when Trump meets with Vladimir Putin, which apparently he's definitely going to do, they're very tight with Iran. They're very tight with North Korea. Getting some kind of a deal and rapport and all of that with Putin opens the door. Putin's extremely powerful right now and a highly respected statesman, although people in America may not understand that. He is a highly respected statesman around the world. He can get Trump in. If Putin says to the Iranians or the North Koreans, hey guys, I talked with Trump. Yeah, I'd like you to talk with him. Let's have a talk with him. They will do it. They will do it. Vladimir Putin, in my opinion, is part of the key, a big part of the key. He is nobody trusts the U.S. after Biden, ever. Don't even want to talk to us, can't stand us. But they all trust Putin. And if Vladimir Putin, we'll talk with Trump. Let me see. I'll talk with my buddy Xi and Iran. Let me make some calls for you, Donald. Maybe I can set up some meetings. To me, that's the key. And that can be done.
Well, but there's an important aspect to this too, because Putin has a card also. Not only do they respect him, but Putin tried to keep Assad in power. I'm talking about going back. Putin pulled Assad aside and said, you have to do this. You have to meet with the Turks. You have to do this. You have to do that. And Assad said no. And in the end, Putin went, "Do svidaniya, you're gone." I think Putin now has the ability to say, I can help you live, but I can't stop you from dying if you choose to do so. Meaning going to the Iranians. Look, we'll see what happens on January 17th. This deal. It's not going to be a NATO alliance.
No.
And so I think Putin's able to say, look, we can work with you and the Americans to create the conditions for a sovereign, secure Iran, defended with a military relationship with us. It's plugged into BRICS and all that, or you can die. But that nuclear thing that you guys are holding on to right now, because remember this, the Russians, they are part of the JCPOA. They're part of the Iran nuclear deal. Russia bought into the notion that you have to contain the Iranian nuclear program. Russia does not want an Iranian nuclear bomb. They are dead set against that. And so Russia is supportive of anything that brings that under control, so long as it's not being used, as every American administration in the past has used, the argument of disarming Iran's nuclear program is just a front for regime change. See, Trump can change that dynamic by saying, nope, it's not a front for regime change. It's a front for regime enhancement. You get rid of these nuclear weapons capabilities, bring it under control, and you and Russia can go off and do your thing. And maybe we'll lift sanctions, and maybe we'll do business with you. But the nuclear thing has to be dealt with. Trump, for all of his faults, and there are many, I wrote a book about this called Deal Breaker, and it basically talked about how Donald Trump destroyed the JCPOA. But the crux of the book was he was the most honest American president when it came to Iran's nuclear program of all. More honest than George W. Bush or HW. More honest, let's see, 2001. So that would be W.
Bush.
More honest than W. More honest than Obama. More honest than Trump. More honest than Biden. Because Trump just basically came up and said, this is a bad deal. And he was right. It is a horrible deal. If you look at it from the American dynamic, when you say, as the American intelligence community has said, that Iran had a nuclear weapons program to build a nuclear weapon. Now, I disagree with that. I think the intelligence is wrong, but that doesn't.
Right.
When the intelligence community briefs the president, says they have a nuclear weapons program, but in 2003, it went dormant, and we don't know what happened to it. Now, I'm the president going, well, that's problematic, isn't it? You're telling me they had a nuclear weapons program, and now it's gone away, and you don't know what happened to it. And now you're going to enter a deal where we've never talked about this nuclear weapons program and where it went. And we're going to enter a deal that's going to allow them at the end of the sunset clauses to have all of the components of a nuclear weapons program should they want to build a nuclear bomb. And you're trying to get me to accept this deal by saying that they don't have a nuclear weapons program, but you told me they did and that it's gone dormant. So what happens if we give them all this capability and that nuclear weapons program comes back out? Now they have a nuclear weapon. This is a bad deal. And from that logic, Trump was 100% correct. 100% correct. And so was Obama, but he was a little less honest. In April of 2015, before they entered it, Obama gave an interview to NPR where he said, yeah, the sunset clauses, as they come close to expiring, we'll reevaluate the entire thing. And if we're not comfortable with where Iran is, we'll just pull the plug on the deal. The Americans were never going to implement this deal, never see it through to fruition. We always lied. Trump was the most honest damn president we've ever had when it comes to this, because he said, this is a bad deal. He's being honest about how he felt. I'm going to do away with it. Decisive action. No diplomacy, no lying. Not like Biden, who came in, has been lying to the Iranians from day one, trying to get the JCPOA back up. But he's lying. The Iranians can't trust him. Trump's the only president that Iran can trust because he will say what he wants. I think there's a window of opportunity here. And I think Vladimir Putin plays a very important role in this, that he can give the Iranians sort of the back support. It's like, if you're going into an interview on your own, or you're going to interview with your powerful uncle behind you going, that's okay, I'm with you here. They ask a tough question, I'll help you with the answer. Putin's there to help Iran get through this process. So I think you're 100% correct.
Yeah, and I think part of this deal too is this. I believe the Russians everybody's looking ahead, right? And I think this is what I would think if I'm the Russians and the Iranians. Look, Iranians, I'm going to load you. You got good weapons, but I'm going to load you. I'm going to give you the best of the best. I'm going to really, really load you up conventionally, so that you'll be protected and people will have to think twice, 3 and 4 times before attacking you. And therefore, you won't need the nuclear weapons and you can make a nuclear deal. So this Iranian-Russian deal, which there is a military component, I think allows the Russians to further enhance the defensive capabilities of Iran, which makes it easier for Iran to make a deal because it's going to be harder to attack them. It puts Iran in a better situation. And there are all these people not understanding in the chat, no, Iran needs nukes. They forget If Iran gets nukes, you damn sure believe they can bet this the Saudis will want them within hours.
Yeah.
And the UAE will want them. And now you'll have a proliferation of nukes in the Middle East. What happens when one of those governments falls and HTS style ISIS people get in charge of that? They're pushing a button. So this is not just about Iranian nukes. It's about Putin and people around the world looking and saying, we don't want to open that door of nukes in the Middle East. We already got it open elsewhere. We're trying to close it.
It's not just nukes, but again, it's not my job to tell Russians about their country. They know their country as well. So if you're a Russian, and I see them in the chat right now commenting, you remember what happened in the 1990s, right? Mm-hmm. If you weren't alive back then, at least you might want to study history. You remember there was a big push to get the Chechens to withdraw from Russia. In fact, they did that. They actually had the Republic of Ichkeria because they successfully fought Russia in the first Chechen War. And you do know that Kazan, Tatarstan, was moving in that direction. They wanted to get out too, but a deal was cut with Yeltsin about autonomy. And so Tatarstan has autonomy, Chechnya has autonomy, and right now things are going okay. But the scenario that Garland just put out there, where, because I saw a comment saying Putin wants a nuclear-armed Iran. No, he doesn't. You have no freaking clue what you're talking about when you say that. That is the dumbest freaking statement that anybody could make. Stop it. Stop pretending that that's what the Russians want. I know what the Russians want because they've told me they don't want a nuclear-armed Iran because everything Garland said will come true. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia gets it, and next, Egypt's pushing for it, and all these are vulnerable countries. I had a conversation with 2 Egyptians the other day. Sisi's gone. He's on his way out. There's going to be a Muslim Brotherhood type uprising. Do you want a nuclear-armed Egypt that now has a Muslim Brotherhood take over, and now you have an Islamic fundamentalist nation with nuclear weapons? Saudi Arabia is very vulnerable. You want them to start the nuclear process and have their pathetic little, kingdom fall apart, and now you have HTS type head choppers with nuclear weapons? Russia doesn't want it. Why? Because they have so many goddamn Muslims in their country that could potentially be radicalized by this. It's the last thing Russia wants. Russia wants stability. And so they will never go for that. I apologize for getting upset, but
no, you're right.
I don't like stupidity. And any concept that Russia wants Iran to have nuclear weapons is a stupid statement because Russia has never said that, never hinted at that. In fact, everything they've done is the exact opposite of that direction. So no, stop it. It's wrong. It's wrong thinking. Nuclear weapons are bad. Well, what about North Korea, Scott? It ain't over yet, guys. It ain't over yet. All right? They have them, but it's not the stability they think they have. And watch me. If there's a peace treaty in the South, the pressure would be put on to lower that threshold. You guys do know that we're ready. I mean, I had this conversation with Dmitry Trenin, and I'll leave you with this. And this is for all the Russians in the chat right now. Chew on this for a minute, will you? Work with me on this one. How old is Vladimir Putin? Well, he's in his 70s. Now, he's in good health. I've watched him flip people on the judo, and I've watched him walk. And he's a cocky-looking guy. He's confident. He's intelligent. He's smart. What's he going to be in 10 years? In his 80s. Now, how many guys in their 80s are flipping judo chops, walking around confident? Maybe Putin's the guy that can do that. Probably not. Russia's going to need a new leader. Who is that leader? Now, they're all going, Medvedev. No. He's not going to be the leader. Russia needs a leader, and they don't have a system capable of producing a new Putin. Because of the pressure the West has put on Russia, and again, we go to the 1994 long telegram written by Charles D'Affaire Mary that talks about how in supporting Yeltsin, we destroyed any chance of Russia having genuine democratic institutions, that Yeltsin destroyed democracy in Russia. And then when we tried to rebuild it, we did it as a CIA front. And so Putin's been fighting, the damage done by Yeltsin and the fact that the CIA, every time they call about democracy, opposition, it's a CIA front. And so basically Russia is a one-party system, united Russia. That's it. That's fine as long as Putin calling the shots. What's going to happen when you replace Putin? Is there another leader out there capable of holding Russia together? Russia will go through a period of great uncertainty and great vulnerability. Again, I've been doing a little bit of research in this, guys. Do some study in the Novosibirsk. Please do it. It's a screwed up oblast politically, corrupt as the day is long. We're talking about old power elites that are manipulating, arresting their opposition. My friend's in jail because he dared run for mayor of Novosibirsk. My God, you can't do that unless Shimkiv, the head of the Legislative Assembly, bless you. But Shimkiv tried to fire him to put his girlfriend in there, got the FSB to set him up, put him in jail, hold him without taking him to trial, to break him, because that's what the FSB has done in Novosibirsk for decades long. And Novosibirsk is not alone. Other Russian oblasts and districts operate in this way too. And they're held together because Putin has put in a veneer of federal control that exists because of Vladimir Putin. When he goes and that federal control goes away, what happens to these rogue oblasts? Do you know how much pro-Ukrainian support is in Novosibirsk? A whole bunch. Do you know that the last political movement that was suppressed by the Novosibirsk authorities before United Russia came in was Navalny? Navalny was big in Novosibirsk. Okay, guys, Russia is a country that has a lot of problems. Putin has been able to, stabilize it and put a veneer of federal control over it. But who comes after Putin? And if you don't know who comes after Putin, you're screwed. And if you don't know how they're going to pick who comes after Putin, you're screwed. So now that's the good news. You ready for the bad news? In February 2026, the New START treaty expires. And for all the Russians out there say, well, we don't need arms control. We got nuclear weapons. We're strong. You're going to be in an arms race with the United States. And you don't want to be in an arms race with the United States. And what's going to happen is about 2034, 2035, when Russia goes into a constitutional existential crisis on who's going to replace Putin, you're going to be in the middle of a goddamn arms race, nuclear arms race with the United States. And so you're going to go through political crisis where it's existential in nature. Who's going to be our president in the middle of a frickin' arms race, nuclear weapons with the United States? You tell me how that ends. So for all you Russians out there, stop it. Okay? It's not, you have a great president. You have a great president who's brought you out of disaster, but you don't have a great future. You're resting on your laurels. There's a lot of problems coming down the road, and you've got to find a way to fix it. And you don't do that by being cocky and stupid about how Russia wants nuclear weapons in Iran. No, they don't. The key to Russia's survival is stability. Stability, not conflict. And so Russia has some work to do, a lot of work to do. They have to bring an end to this conflict in Ukraine. They have to find a way to normalize relationships with Europe. They have to find a way to make BRICS succeed. That's not a guaranteed outcome, by the way. And they have to get along with the United States. They need arms control. Russia will never do arms control. Yes, you will, because you have to survive. And then you have to get your own act together. Fix Novosibirsk. Go fix Novosibirsk. Then fix Omsk and fix everything else that's happening down there. And then come up with a system that says when Vladimir Putin steps down as president, as he will, the person that becomes president will have the same legitimacy, authority, power, and control that Putin has. Because that's what happens here in the United States. You see, we actually have a process that allows for the transfer of power from Joe Biden, who hates Donald Trump, but the transfer of power is going to be made. We sort of know what's going to happen. What's going to happen to Russia when Vladimir Putin steps down? And if you can't answer that question, you've got some serious problems. Anyway, I just wanted to leave on that. I'm sorry to lose my temper.
No, I blame you. And I'll make one quick sentence. I'll leave it at this. I think it's interesting that the whole, Trumpian view of the MAGA movement is, from what I hear recently, we got to get out of these foreign entanglements because we got a lot of problems at home, and we got to kind of try to stabilize America, stabilize the border. I think that's the position of Trump. It's interesting because looking at the Putin government, it seems to me that there's an element of that saying we got to get this. We'd like to get this Ukraine thing stabilized that way we can stabilize the things we need at home for the future. You know what I mean? Like countries are literally saying, like any sane leader would say, we got to kind of get disentangled from military problems and issues so that we can stabilize the situation here. So that's interesting that they want, look at the Iranians. What do they want? They want to stabilize their economy and grow their economy. You know what I mean? That more and more leaders, an Orban, on and on. You got more and more leaders saying we're getting entangled in all of this outside stuff. We got to try to stabilize at home. And it seems to me that's who the voters are voting for these days. ScottRitter.com is where you want to go.
Expansionism. But before we get there, just to dust off a couple of things, how much longer do you think the Ukraine military can successfully resist or even put up any resistance at all to the Russian onslaught?
I don't think that they're resisting widely. There are a few hard points. One just fell recently within the last 24 hours, and the Ukrainians took very heavy losses, and there were several that surrendered. I think they're going to continue to fight in small groups, penny packets, until there's nothing left.
Until there's nothing left. Do you expect the Trump administration will continue the flow of ammunition and material and cash to the Ukraine government that has occurred under the Biden administration?
Unfortunately, I do see that continuing because, and this will also have an influence over what goes on in the Middle East. I think the Trump team and the supporting cast is very interested in a win. In other words, whatever they do, whatever the president does, it has to be portrayed as a quote unquote win for President Trump. The problem right now is that no such win is possible in Ukraine. And I think the president is beginning to figure it out. The problem there is, of course, he's surrounded by people who are not telling him the truth, who are pretending that the Ukrainian army is a stalwart organization, that the Russians have taken heavy losses, that they're running out of people, and all this nonsense, none of which is true. And as long as he listens to them, it's going to be harder and harder for him to come to terms with reality. And the reality, very simply, is we have no leverage, and Moscow has no particular incentive to listen to anything we say. And the smart move for him is to suspend all further military aid and then withdraw all U.S. personnel in and out of uniform, intelligence, or otherwise, to simply say, as far as we're concerned, the war is over, and this is not something we ever wanted. We don't want it now. And of course, once you pull our aid, the war will, in fact, end, which is what he has said he wants to have happen. He's talked about the loss of human life and the destructive nature of this whole thing. That's how you end it. Then the best he could do is say, I'm willing to host a conference between Moscow, Kiev, and Moscow's European neighbors, and then let them try to sort out a solution. But that means that we're recognizing the limitations of our power and influence. Nobody wants to do that in Washington, so I suspect we'll just tread water for another 6, 7, or 8 weeks.
You know, what you've said is in part is disturbing to me, not Trump's urge to peace. Obviously, I applaud and commend that. But the idea, and you know, Ritter has said this, McGovern has said this, Larry Johnson has said this, that the intelligence community would continue to feed the president, President Trump, materially misleading information as they did to President Biden. And that as a result of these material misstatements, the president would make decisions that results in the deaths of human beings. This is repellent. Is Trump going to be the tool of the deep state the way Biden was?
Well, certainly Mr. Radcliffe will do nothing to change this. He's going to carry the status quo message back to the White House. There is a chance that if Tulsi Gabbard is confirmed, that she goes in and demands ground truth, knowing full well that this nonsense is inaccurate. That's about the best we can hope for, because I just don't see that Mr. Radcliffe is any different from his predecessor than, let us say, Waltz is different from Jake Sullivan. And there's certainly not much difference between Mr. Rubio and Tony Blinken.
Very, very dangerous and unsettling, in my view. Let's you mentioned a connection between arms to Ukraine and the Middle East. What is that connection, Colonel?
Well, you'd have to explain to me what I've said about arms going one way or the other. I do think that arms for the Middle East are the number one priority. If we know anything about this administration, Israel is the priority. If there is any strategy, it's just called Israel. I think that there is a recognition that we don't have much more to give to Ukraine. And I think that's also, sadly, why they're now going to start trying to conscript 18-year-olds, because the Ukrainian government has been told by us, you've got to demonstrate some robust capability or we have nothing to stand on at the negotiating table. Well, here's a wild and crazy view. We don't have anything to stand on anyway. And just because you're willing to kill 18-year-olds at great speed and in great numbers isn't going to help at the negotiating table. But this is the mentality right now.
Right. I noticed that the bellicose statements of General Kellogg and Congressman Waltz, the general being the president's designated Ukraine envoy, and Mike Waltz being the incoming national security advisor, have been silenced or dialed back. Even Sebastian Gorka has stopped threatening President Putin. That can't be a coincidence. That must have come down from on high, don't you? We both know Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it probably has. I also think Donald Trump has gotten some ground truth from the Department of Defense. And you and I know that the voices, the lone voices in this wilderness that have cautioned against unrestricted flows of armaments and ammunition and capabilities from the United States to Ukraine have said on more than one occasion, we're dangerously close to having nothing with which to fight a war ourselves. And I think that word has reached President Trump, and I think he's surprised because, once again, he's always had this image of the United States Armed Forces as, you know, the invincible Superman. It's not, hasn't been for a long time. And he certainly didn't preside over that, though he thinks he has. So I think he's been getting some ground truth there, and that may have induced a little bit of restraint and caution while he sorts through this. But now he's got to get down and dirty with the intelligence crowd and find people who will tell him the truth. And he may have to dig down to much lower levels to get the truth.
You know, I was very, very disappointed. I wrote my column about this today. Well, it came out today. I wrote it 2 days ago. But Tulsi Gabbard, who, when she was a member of Congress, was a fierce defender of the Fourth Amendment and voted against the section of the Patriot Act, which the intelligence community uses to spy on all Americans. Over the weekend, she did a flip-flop. She probably decided she needed the votes of people like Tom Cotton and that crowd in order to get confirmed. It doesn't mean that she won't be truthful on other things, but it's an enormous disappointment to people like me, and I think you, who believe that the Constitution means what it says. These things happen. People change their minds in order to get the votes. Let's go to the ceasefire, or the so-called ceasefire. Professor Mearsheimer says it's a significant defeat for Israel. Do you agree?
You said the significance is deep?
No, he said the so-called ceasefire is a significant defeat for Israel because none of its goals have been achieved, and that Netanyahu is only agreeing to it, kicking and screaming under pressure from Trump.
Well, my inclination is to say not entirely, because I think there's more happening behind the scenes than any of us realize. First of all, I think the Israelis could profit from some form of ceasefire, though I expect, having looked at the agreement, this can't last longer than 6 weeks, because that's the first phase. And that's the phase of greatest importance to Mr. Netanyahu, because that's when he's supposed to get back the hostages that are still alive. I think once that's done, the ceasefire will be completely meaningless, and they'll resume operations as they have in the past. I think what's more important, too, at the same time, is I think behind the scenes, President Trump and his administration may well have agreed to a joint attack with Israel against Iran. And that's going to be an air and naval power attack, largely aircraft and missiles. But I'm fairly certain that that agreement was reached. And in return for that, I think Mr. Netanyahu was willing to go along with this short-term ceasefire, because he would like to have some measure of quiet on his flanks while he goes after Iran with our substantial help.
Are Israel and Iran preparing for war with each other as we speak?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it.
According to Israeli newspapers, not Haaretz, which you and I read, the president, Trump, entered into a side deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu, not published, but leaked to this reporter and not denied. The side deal consists of 3 known points. The first is allowing NSO, an Israeli software company, to sell its product called Pegasus, on which Joe Biden imposed an embargo. Pegasus is the zero click. Pegasus would allow the government to enter anybody's mobile or laptop or desktop device without tricking them into clicking onto a link. When Biden discovered, to his credit, that the FBI bought this in the Trump administration without telling President Trump, he ordered them to get rid of it. They store it in a garage in New Jersey. I know this sounds like The Sopranos, but they do store it in a garage in New Jersey.
Sounds like the mafia, you know.
Right. He then had his Secretary of Commerce impose an embargo on this. Part 1 of the side deal is that the embargo would be lifted. This would be terribly detrimental to the personal privacy of everybody, including Trump. Second part of the so-called side deal is that Trump will support the repopulation and resettlement by Israeli settlers of the West Bank. And the third part of the side deal is that if the IDF has to go back into Gaza for any reason, Trump will support it. What do you say about that? I mean, if there's such a side deal is known to the public and known to the Palestinians, everybody might look at this a little differently.
Well, I don't see why anyone is surprised by it. I'm not even sure that it's the secret that everyone thinks. I think this is completely consistent with President Trump's approach to foreign and defense policy. You know, this is the Israel first administration. And I think probably the most interesting comment is the one that I think you broadcast earlier last week of Kash Patel talking about the FBI and then saying, but Israel is our first priority. I think you have to believe what these people say. And so I find nothing surprising in that, particularly given the enormous amounts of money that have been poured into the Trump campaign by the Zionist community.
So you expect the same level of military support to the Israelis under Trump as was the case under Biden. It's hard to imagine more, but I could certainly imagine the same level, which is 100% of what they need.
Well, I think this is more support. Remember, the President Trump and his appointees were all critical that the Biden administration had not done enough. I think they were telling you the truth. That's their view. And I think that Gaza is scheduled for extinction.
So is the so-called West Bank. All you have to do is listen to these people. There's no news there. The Pegasus revelation is disturbing, but not surprising, given the people currently interested in going after anyone, anywhere in the world who is construed as an anti-Semite. And of course, that term is used effectively against anybody that doesn't want to unconditionally support Israel. So I'm not really surprised by any of it. I'm disappointed, but I think this is where we're headed. And it's just as I am convinced we're headed to war with Iran.
Boy, if the government begins using zero-click in order to evaluate the content of our speech, we will have reached a very, very dangerous point in this country, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Alien and Sedition Acts and the John Adams administration, where people literally, including famously a congressman, Matthew Lyons of Vermont, were punished for their speech, which was critical of the government's foreign policy initiatives.
Well, we had something very similar under Woodrow Wilson, as you know.
Yes, we did. And that's still the law, unfortunately, hasn't been used in a long time. That's the Espionage Act of 1917.
Yeah.
It was famously used by Wilson to prosecute Princeton undergraduates who went to a draft office in Trenton, New Jersey, not far from Princeton. Remember, Wilson was the former president of the university, and who read aloud what he deemed subversive material in an effort to dissuade young men from going into the draft office. What did they read aloud? The Declaration of Independence. That's where we may be going again. Where do you think we would be going with Donald Trump's expressed desires to have some sort of dominion over the Panama Canal, Greenland, and Canada?
Well, remember, we've got to go back to this view of it's got to be a win. The president needs a win. We need a win. How do we get a win? And I think Panama and Greenland in particular, particularly Greenland, frankly, I think that's viewed as a place where we can assert ourselves, bully our way into the situation, and claim victory by having gotten control in some fashion of Greenland, to a lesser extent the Panama Canal, and build that as enhancing American national security, as expanding the Monroe Doctrine, and expanding American power and influence. The same thing is true about the comments on Canada, annexing central Western Canada that ostensibly is unhappy with their friends in the East. All of this has a lot to do with this notion of a win. George Kennan said an awful lot of what we do. In fact, he thought most of it in foreign policy was designed to create a pleasing picture of ourselves to the American public. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think that has a lot to do with it. It also distracts people from the obvious disaster in Ukraine. And I think what will eventually become an even greater disaster in the Middle East.
I mean, do you think we're on the verge of another so-called era of manifest destiny? Because Donald Trump likes the look of Greenland as part of the United States rather than as part of Denmark?
I think so. I don't know that I would call it manifest destiny. As I said, from his vantage point, it's one of these things. This is a win for America. Remember, Donald Trump is about winning. If you can't say it's a win, he's not terribly interested in the subject. So it's easier for him over 6-7 weeks from now to sort of dismiss what's happening in Eastern Europe, the failure of the, Ukraine folly, and say, we've had it with that. We're moving on to other things. And he thinks he's going to reshape the Middle East to Israel's satisfaction. I don't think that's going to work. And I think there's a tendency to dismiss out of hand the very high probability that if we attack Iran with the Israelis, that the Russians will actually intervene to support the Iranians. And then again, there's also the failure to recognize that not only the Chinese, but Indian the Indian government is horrified by that kind of action. And while they may not intervene militarily, they're certainly not going to support us in any way. In other words, the damage we're doing to ourselves in the Middle East is not widely appreciated inside the United States. So then he turns attention to these other matters, which can be construed as a win. I mean, what's Panama going to do if we decide to re-annex the zone? What can they do? Nothing.
Well, Colonel, this is very distressing and depressing. What I'm hearing you say is more of the same and maybe worse in foreign policy from Biden to Trump. More of the same and maybe worse. If I'm misreading you, please correct me.
You know, at this point, it's hard to see another course being charted, isn't it, Judge? I mean, I'd like to say that President Trump, who I know wants nothing to do with a real war against anybody, is not stepping forward and saying something along the lines that I did earlier. We didn't want the war in Ukraine. We're not going to support it. And we're pulling out. And this is the quickest way to end the killing. And once we've pulled out, there should be a conference, and we're happy to support it so that Moscow and its neighbors can sort things out with Kiev. I would really celebrate that, but I'm not hearing that. That may happen in the future. Who knows? It's not impossible. But right now, we're still stuck with it has to be a win. We have to look as though we bullied people into this, just as we're hearing about the ceasefire. Well, we pushed Netanyahu. See, Trump's tough. He made Netanyahu.
Revolutionary salute to Queen Shannon G for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute to you.
Netanyahu bow and do this. I think that's misleading stuff. I think there's a much larger agenda. It is still Netanyahu's agenda. It's still the greater Israel project, and it's still leading to war with Iran.
Colonel, I was appalled when, well, first of all, these confirmation hearings are clown shows. The Democrats are just making points, scoring points with their base at home, or the Republicans are lionizing the nominees. However, I was appalled when a senator asked Pete Hegseth, my former Fox colleague, if as Secretary of Defense he received an order to shoot unarmed American civilians, would he decline the order? And he declined to answer that. How could anybody consider that an appropriate order under any circumstances?
Well, I did not watch all of those because, frankly, as I saw them when they began, the questions were not informed. The exchange was infantile.
Yes.
I just think it convinced me that at this particular point in time, Congress is almost useless as a political body in the government. I don't see anything good coming out of it. It's just about money and redistributing tax money and whatever for their own benefit. So my opinion of the whole thing is just fallen through the floor. Now, as far as the question goes, it's incomprehensible that would be said. But then remember, there's a permanent interest on the left to discredit everybody and anyone on the right. And the way you do that is by suggesting that, we're crazy right-wing nationalist, fascists, and so forth. What's disappointing is that Hegseth should have simply said, I can't imagine any such circumstances. If they were to arise, I would have to see them and understand them before I would authorize, under any circumstances, the use of violence against any American citizen here or abroad.
It's not the answer we got when Pam Bondi, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, was asked if there's an enemy. She has an enemies list in the DOJ to prosecute perceived or real enemies of Donald Trump. She basically said, not on my watch. A good answer.
Yes.
A good answer rather than evading. Colonel, thank you very much. I'm sorry it's a little gloomy, but I do appreciate deeply the analysis that you've given us. ceasefire negotiated and supposedly agreed to between Israel and Hamas, as you understand it, is it a defeat for Israel?
It's I wouldn't qualify it as a defeat. I think tactically Israel has suffered a number of losses and there is no strategy. And we are what October 7th did was unleash a protracted war that accelerated the process that has been developing in Israel, Palestine, and in the region for many years. But to call this a defeat would be, I don't know, to look at it with rose-colored glasses, because tens of thousands of lives, and I think we're going to see that many tens of thousands more were lost under the rubble that were not known before. Once reporters and investigators are able to get in, those lives should have never been lost. The destruction of Gaza, even the loss of many of the hostages and captives should have never happened were it not for the savagery of Israel's patron in Washington, the Blinken, Biden, McGurk administration, which wanted to see this war go on as long as possible because it wanted to see how much damage Israel could do in the region to reverse the trend of multipolarity, the rise of the resistance axis. And they did succeed in doing a whole lot of damage, but the human damage is immeasurable. Right. So that was part of Israel's objective too. So I can't call this a defeat, but it certainly was not this was not a victory for Israel, and they certainly failed to achieve what Netanyahu promised, which was total victory.
Will Smotrich and Ben-Gvir leave the government if the cabinet and the Knesset accept this? I don't know how the Knesset could accept it if they vote against it, but let's just say the Knesset accepts it and the cabinet accepts it. Do they leave Netanyahu high and dry and confronting re-election while he's on trial for bribery?
Well, I think one reason Netanyahu was able to do this deal was also why he was able to extend the war, which was that he replaced his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, with Israel Katz, who is a sycophant, and he strengthened his coalition and expanded his coalition. And so Ben-Gvir and Smotrich don't have the same hold over Netanyahu that they had before. It is worth noting, in light of the ridiculous comments made at the State Department over the past 48 hours, that it was Hamas's fault every time for sabotaging negotiations, that Ben-Gvir has now come out and boasted that again and again, he personally prevented a ceasefire deal by undermining it through his power in the coalition.
Got it. Before we play these two very, very dramatic tapes, one involving you and one involving your colleague and friend Sam Husseini, set the stage for us. What was happening at the State Department when they dragged you out? What was Secretary Blinken saying? And before we run the tape, what message were you attempting to get across to him and to your fellow journalists?
Well, we'll discuss the message after watching it. Tony Blinken came in today for his final press conference and a curtain call, victorious curtain call, kind of a victory lap to tout his Middle East policy, pat himself on the back for a ceasefire deal that would have never happened if Trump were not coming into office. We got word early, actually at around 9:30 a.m. And so I raced in there and managed to get in some questions to Tony Blinken that I've always wanted to ask him I had to ask the questions under duress. I would have never been called on. No dissenters are called on by Blinken or his press secretary. And one of the purposes as well is to hold him accountable for what I consider to be the Holocaust of our time. You know, we may not get Nuremberg 2.0 in the near term, but he needs to at least feel uncomfortable and have this disgusting curtain call ruined by people asking legitimate fact-based questions about how he allowed this to happen.
Here is you challenging the Secretary of State and his people, getting you out of the room. Blinken, number one, Chris.
I have even greater respect, even greater appreciation for you asking the tough questions, for you holding us to account. Being on the receiving end, sometimes that's not always the most comfortable thing, not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in
I'm
May?
happy to address questions.
We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance. Thank you.
Rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism. Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating.
Yeah, I have a statement. Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu.
Questions at the end.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
Thank you.
What happened to you after they pushed you out of the room? Were you confronted by police?
There was a police officer who was looking for me, and I complied with him, and they walked me off the premises. And he said, don't come back today. And I said, well, you won't see me for the rest of this administration.
Why did you? Okay. Why did you feel the need to go into his face? Do you think he, knowing who you are and anticipating what you were going to ask, would ever have called on you?
No one ever gets held accountable in our society for the worst, most titanic crimes. No one was held accountable for the financial crash, the housing crisis. No one is held accountable for the Iraq War. No one is held accountable for any of the crimes that our military and financial elite carry out. And Tony Blinken now is uniquely responsible for the human rights catastrophe of my generation. And he's someone that was in DC when I was growing up. I knew people who are close to him growing up. He's someone who represents himself as a Jew, as I am. He's someone who has broadcast and boasted about his personal ancestral ties to Israel through his father-in-law, Samuel Pissar, who was an Israel lobbyist in France, and his grandfather, Nathan, who is also an Israel lobbyist who actually helped found the apartheid state of Israel. And so he needed to be challenged by me personally, face to face. And I also wanted to confront him for the horror that he brought to the lives of the people of Gaza in the name of defending the cause of Zionism that he holds so dear to his heart. I wish that he could hear the screams and the cries of the children of Gaza. I wish he could have been confronted by my friend Rifat Al-Arir, the great writer and poet who was killed in his home for social media posts in a targeted assassination with US-made bombs. But Tony Blinken wasn't even listening to his own staff in the Middle East Bureau at the State Department who were bringing him evidence of US weapons being responsible for this Holocaust. The whistleblowers had been ignored. 60 Minutes held a report for 8 months featuring the State Department whistleblowers. So it really fell on our shoulders, any reporter who was able to get in that briefing and send that message to Tony Blinken. But for me, this was personal. It was personal as an anti-Zionist Jew. It was personal as someone who had close relationships with people who were slaughtered thanks to the soft-handed Eichmann-like signature of Tony Blinken. And it was personal because I had the ability to get into that room. I have a responsibility to speak on behalf of the 300 or so Palestinian journalists who were slaughtered by US-made weapons sent by Tony Blinken, Joe Biden, and Brett McGurk. And I did what I could because I don't believe in this society that Tony Blinken will be held accountable as he should in Nuremberg 2.0. And that's what Sam Husseini called for, as you'll see, is him to be sent to The Hague.
I have to tell you that I'm saying this not because I'm your friend and colleague, but even if I were just a neutral observer, you are the personification of courage. This is a conversation that needed to happen. I'm talking about the conversation that Blinken wouldn't respond to when you questioned him. And I am thrilled that I'm able to provide a forum in which this conversation can be continued after they kicked you out. After they kicked you out, what happened?
Well, Sam Husseini proceeded to interrupt and was the room went into kind of a panic mode. I could see that Tony Blinken's staff was very nervous. I got to confront Matt Miller, his smirking press secretary, on the way out, who's become sort of the face and voice of defending the policy of sort of the railways to Auschwitz in the form of a military air bridge to Israel's Nevatim air base, giving them all the tools they needed to do this while pretending they were fighting for a ceasefire. And Matt Miller was there to see me out the door. And I, got to say to his face, "You smirked your way through this. How dare you?" Just such disgusting figures that I've seen day after day. And, I was there yesterday, Judge, at the briefing, but behaved myself as I usually had. I mean, I always followed the process as Tony Blinken ordered. And it was shocking to me to see all of these reporters, including some who've challenged Tony Blinken and Matt Miller, thank Matt Miller for all of his work over the past few years and thank him for their fine relationship.
Well, Max, let's face it, they're afraid of you. They're afraid of your courage. They're afraid of your extraordinary knowledge of the facts on the ground, and they're afraid of what you'll expose them for having done. We'll play this clip. This is some rough stuff, I understand. I haven't seen it yet, but this is what happened in the press briefing room in the State Department a few hours ago to Max's colleague, Sam Husseini, after Max was escorted from the room. Chris.
I carried with me.
Miller says he doesn't know about the Hannibal directive.
Again, I'm happy to address questions in a few more minutes. I look forward to answering questions in a few more minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Instead of making another speech every day.
Sir, would you like to be escorted out?
Go away.
You don't have the responsibility to tell me where to go. Do you want to be escorted out or not?
I want to
Thank you.
answer questions.
I look forward to answering questions in a minute.
I'm a
Thank you.
journalist. I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask a question in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller
So-
has explicitly told me he will not answer my questions. I'm justified
So-
in what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket, the names of those who had been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally, I just wanted to share this morning.
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look forward to answering questions in a few minutes.
You know about Israel's nuclear weapons. Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I'm asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I ask.
Please, sir, respect the process. We'll have an opportunity to take questions in a few minutes.
Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
Oh, respect the process. Respect this process while everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague?
What would the justification be for dragging him out when he was sitting there making notes? I understand he interrupted earlier, but then he became quiet.
They will never call on Sam Husseini. And Matt Miller started and ordered the cops to come in. The press secretary ordered the cops in to remove him because Sam Husseini attempted to ask a question out of turn. Honestly, if Blinken had just called on Sam, he would have asked a tough question that Blinken could have answered, but they will not allow us to speak in there after they got the sense of what we were asking. It was, it just is too penetrating for them. And what Sam did there, I think, was a remarkable feat. CNN actually showed this to a national audience with a much more vivid angle, showing Sam from the front. He was asking about Israel's secret nuclear program with 3 gigantic Secret Service cops strangling him. Then he challenged Blinken, who says, follow the process, on what process Blinken was following when Amnesty International and the International Court of Justice found Israel guilty of extermination and culpable of genocide. And he managed to get that out to a national audience and show how the press is actually treated, that dissents in the briefing room, the real dissenting press, they're dragged out by burly cops. I allowed a staffer to escort me out, but Sam was, the press secretary ordered those burly cops to physically drag him out and almost suffocate him. It's not against the law, by the way, to disrupt, but they treated.
No, it's not against the law. It's not a criminal offense at all. Before we go on any further, Ryan Grimm, I think you probably know him. He may be from The Intercept, I'm not sure, is the person who took that video, and I need to give him credit for the video on air. What became of Sam after they dragged him out? Surely he wasn't arrested. It's not a prosecutable offense.
Yeah, I haven't had any contact with him. I know he's been connected with a lawyer. But I mean, this is just the hypocrisy of the State Department, with Blinken praising the press corps and saying, we were friends. We all went out to Jose Andres' restaurant, got, free drinks together from Jose Andres. And I love you guys. And thank you for the tough questions, while he's presiding over the worst killing of journalists since World War II, higher than in World War II, of a much smaller population in Gaza, deliberately assassinated by Israel and doing absolutely nothing about it. And then he has a reporter physically dragged away for asking tough questions because he wants to muzzle us. I mean, the whole hypocrisy.
I can't expect you to predict the future, but other than being tossed into the ash bin of history, will Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan ever see justice, ever be made to answer for the genocide they perpetrated?
No one ever as I said before, this is the problem. I think one of the central crises we face in America is that none of our military or financial elite who are involved in shocking crimes, including violating U.S. law, violating the Leahy law, as the entire Biden administration did, which is an arms control law, violating laws on Wall Street, everywhere else, they're never held to account. The healthcare industry gouging consumers. And it's leading to a crisis where people are beginning to take matters into their own hands. I'm not a fan of violence. I did what I do, which is to ask hard questions and not follow the process, which is designed to prevent hard questions and protect the hypocrisy and criminality of this regime. It really is a regime. But we're facing a crisis in this country, which is leading us into a dark time. And as we go forward with this conversation, Judge, about the ceasefire, I think the lesson that has been learned is that the U.S. has foreclosed any possibility except force to deter Israeli violence.
Why do you think Netanyahu agreed to virtually the same terms that he rejected at least 3 or 4 times in the past 6 or 7 months?
One reason is Trump was coming in. He was afraid of what Trump might do. He knew Trump did not want an open-ended conflict, which could lead to war with Iran at the beginning of his administration. He also wanted to give Trump a victory because he likes Trump better than Biden. And Netanyahu learned that since this ceasefire was put on the table after, as Sam Husseini pointed out, after the ICJ decision ordering Israel to stop its incursion into Rafah and accusing it of genocide, after this deal was introduced on May 26th and Hamas essentially accepted it, Netanyahu had no leverage exerted against him. And no matter what he did, whether it was attacking inside Iran, attacking the Iranian consulate in Damascus, nothing was being done against him except whenever Iran decided to retaliate. And so Netanyahu learned the lesson. As I said, Blinken waved the white flag before Netanyahu that he could get away with anything with this administration and the bombs would continue to flow. Record levels of bombs, $25 billion arms packages. So Netanyahu then began to expand his campaign, attacking Lebanon after a very suspicious incident in Majd al-Shams, which was blamed on Hezbollah killing Syrians who were living in Israeli-occupied territory. Israel began assassinating top-level Hezbollah leadership. And this, and Matthew Miller said this actually yesterday in so many words, that they were waiting in Washington until Hamas was sufficiently weakened. And they started to see that the forces that they wanted essentially exterminated, or in Miller's own words, wiped off the map, whether in Lebanon or Syria, started to lose ground. They wanted to give Israel more latitude to continue that vicious assault. And so it was actually the Biden administration that again and again prevented a ceasefire. What then took place when the Biden administration decided they could have a ceasefire, and when they wanted it so that they could take full credit for it before Trump could potentially win a re-election and take credit, was the killing of Yahya Sinwar. But as I pointed out at the time, the killing of the Hamas leader, who was the sort of mastermind of the October 7th operation, would make it impossible to negotiate with Hamas because all negotiations had to be approved by him. He was a central figure, and Blinken admitted that. Blinken also admitted that Hamas had replenished its ranks and was still a significant fighting force on the battlefield. So he said that from the time that Sinwar was killed until about 48 hours ago, they were unable to get a ceasefire because it was too chaotic and they didn't have the right people to communicate with inside Hamas. But Blinken and Biden and Kamala endorsed the killing of Yahya Sinwar. So they actually delayed the ceasefire again by supporting the killing of this figure that could have been negotiated with. And remember, Israel killed Salah Arori, the previous negotiator, in his office in Beirut. They killed Ismail Haniyeh in his hotel room in Tehran, who was the negotiator after that. So they killed all the negotiators because they wanted to change the regional picture. And they've said that all along. And in order to change the regional picture, Judge, they had to sacrifice the lives, tens of thousands of people in the Gaza Strip who were killed, tortured, and disappeared, all for this geostrategic diabolical master plan.
Here's a brief clip from Josh Paul. You may know him, the highest ranking State Department official to resign from the Biden-Blinken State Department over the genocide. A brief but succinct and telling interview he gave last weekend. Chris, cut number 10.
Most of the bombs come from America. Most of the technology comes from America, and all of the fighter jets, all of Israel's fixed-wing fleet comes from America. There is a linkage between every single bomb that is dropped in Gaza and the US, because every single bomb that is dropped from an American-made plane.
These Israeli airstrikes, you could say, are made in America.
They are.
Made in America. Tony Blinken can't deny that. Joe Biden can't deny it. Jake Sullivan can't deny it. And history can't deny it. Max, thank you very much. You're so courageous. Thanks for doing what you do. And thanks for the privilege of allowing me to speak.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen Shannon G for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute.
So Pete Hegseth is at the Capitol doing his confirmation hearings with the Senate, and during the hearing, a protester started yelling this. Watch this.
Pete, you are a misogynist. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist, and you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities.
Focused on lethality, meritocracy, war fighting, accountability, and readiness.
When are you going to stop bombing babies in Gaza? Veterans are committing suicide and are homeless. My father, a veteran, committed suicide, and you're sending money to bomb babies. We send money to bomb children in Gaza. Shame on all of you. We need money. We need money for veterans committing suicide. Veterans are homeless. We need money here, not to bomb babies in Gaza. Shame on all of you. My father, a veteran, committed suicide. We need money to help veterans who have PTSD, not money to send to bomb babies. What are we doing? Shame on all of you who don't speak up against the genocide.
20 years of illegal war and a genocide in Gaza. That's the recruiting crisis. No money for disasters. Only $8 billion to ambulance for children. That's the recruiting crisis.
Can I leave, please?
I love Greg Stoker. Great. You know, it's great that people are there and they're actually saying this. So after Hegseth was called a Christian Zionist, Tom Cotton and him had this exchange. This was really something to be seen, because this is really, I think, the sentiment of so many in U.S. government.
Being a Christian Zionist, I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I'm a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you.
This is what we're dealing with, guys. America first, America first. Oh, wait, no, just kidding. Israel first. As many of you know, we've had a big disaster here in the state of California, a lot of destruction. The fires are still raging, a lot of destruction there. And here's Speaker Mike Johnson. Speaker Mike Johnson says that aid to California should be conditional. This is Americans. California is part of America, by the way. But he's saying now the aid to California should be conditional.
Are you open to providing aid to California without any conditions at all?
I think we've got to have a serious conversation about that. Obviously, there's been water resource mismanagement, forest management mistakes, all sorts of problems. And it does come down to leadership. And it appears to us that state and local leaders were derelict in their duty in many respects. So that's something that has to be factored in. I think there should probably be conditions on that aid. That's my personal view. We'll see what the consensus is. I haven't had a chance to socialize that with any of the members over the weekend because we've all been very busy, but it'll be part of the discussion for sure.
What about the debt limit increase? What about tying the debt limit increase to it?
There's some discussion about that, but we'll see where it goes.
I mean, if you needed more proof that they are Israel first, more than they are Americans, I mean, he is saying it right here. There needs to be conditions on this aid. Meanwhile, what does Johnson and so many others in government say over and over when it comes to Israel? No conditions, unconditional support to Israel, unconditional support to Israel. But the state of California has conditional support. I mean, this stuff is just completely outrageous.
Extraordinary crisis right now. And the world needs us to be strong. They need us to remember our creed and our admonition. Turmoil and violence have rocked the Middle East and Eastern Europe. We all know it. And tensions continue to build in the Indo-Pacific. The country demands strong leadership of this body, and we must not waver. Our nation's greatest ally in the Middle East is under attack. The first bill that I'm going to bring to this floor in just a little while will be in support of our dear friend Israel, and we're overdue in getting that done.
Oh, yeah, that's the first bill he's bringing to the floor as Speaker of the House. The first bill is to support Israel. I mean, this is what has happened? This has to be called out over and over and over again. We are our own sovereign country. Israel can fend for itself. What are our greatest ally? How exactly? No one can answer that question. How exactly are they our greatest ally? What have they provided for us? Have they provided us troops in conflict? No. Are they our greatest trading partner? No. In fact, in the Middle East, our greater allies, our greatest partners are actually Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. We get more benefit from those nations than we do from Israel. But Israel is the greatest ally to US politicians, and they're greasing the pockets for their campaigns. That is, it's true. Israel is his greatest ally. Israel's the greatest ally for many of them sitting in that room. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over these next, even just these next few months, as Trump has been pushing ahead, strong arming Israel into a negotiation. You know, we've got the Trump side of things, and he's in his last term. This is it for him. And then on the other side, you've got all these bought off politicians. So it's going to be an interesting, I think, battle between the Trump America First MAGA crowd and these guys that just claim to be, I mean, they're just outright admitting to being Israel first above Americans. Conditional aid to Californians, unconditional aid to Israel. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next even just couple of weeks or few months. But I'm hoping that we really, truly drain the swamp. And that swamp that needs to be drained is of anybody who has interests other than the interests of the American people. And that's not just Israel. That also includes those who are bought off by Big Pharma. We're going to see a big battle there with RFK Jr. Those who are bought off by the military industrial complex in general, we're going to see a battle there. I mean, we're going to see a lot of, hopefully this time around, real true draining of the swamp. The countdown is on before the new administration exposes the entire pandemic. Most of us know that large sums of people's health have been negatively impacted by global coercion, whether severe side effects or experiencing long COVID. Check out this natural solution formulated by Dr. Peter McCullough in collaboration with The Wellness Company. And they just leveled up their original detox formula for $30 less, introducing the 3-in-1 Ultimate Spike Detox, conveniently consolidated into one capsule with 4 times more nattokinase, 500 milligrams of bromelain, and 500 milligrams of turmeric root extract. Nattokinase is an enzyme researched for its anti-clogging effects, anti-blood clotting effects, and it may work to break down spike proteins. Combined with bromelain and curcumin, it provides a potent blend for detoxification and cellular support. Crafted with 100% natural ingredients, Ultimate Spike Detox is backed by research offering effective support for your cell's natural repair and recovery. So experience the only formula approved and used by Dr. McCullough, a top freedom-fighting doctor who risked it all. Head to twc.health/Kim. Use code Kim to get 15% off plus free shipping. Again, that's twc.health/Kim. Use code Kim for free shipping and 15% off. Thanks for watching.
Purposes only. This video is just for entertainment. Anything I say here comes directly from the news, and all I'm doing is giving my opinion and just connecting some dots. Not saying that you have to believe me, I'm just giving my own opinion. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And when it comes to the fires in Los Angeles, there are people that are connecting some very interesting dots. People did discover the 2028 Los Angeles Smart City plans, where these documents outline turning Los Angeles into a smart city. So there are people that do believe these fires were set intentionally so they can burn Los Angeles to the ground and build a Los Angeles 2.0, build a smart city. It's not a bad theory whatsoever, given the fact that they have a deadline. They have a 2028 deadline. They want this smart city up by the time of the Olympics. They don't have the time to hear people say, we're not going to leave, this is a bad idea, we're not going to sell. So just like with Maui, they have quote unquote nature come through and make them leave. There are other theories out there that say that they are doing this because they want to destroy evidence, destroy tunnels, but they could be doing this for both reasons: to knock out two birds with one stone, destroy all the evidence, destroy all the tunnels, and at the same time, destroy everything to build this Los Angeles 2.0. But we already know this. We already know these quote unquote theories. They are getting to the point that the fact checkers have to be released from the toilets and sewers they reside in to let us know that these fires were not started, so a smart city could be built in Los Angeles. Whenever the fact checkers are released, you better look a little bit closer into those quote unquote theories. But anyway, like I said, most of us already know about these quote unquote theories. But the question a lot of people have, if these fires were started to turn Los Angeles into a smart city, then what location is next? Well, I'm here to say all of them. All the locations are next, because for quite some time now on this channel, I have been talking about these long-range transportation plans. Every city, every state in the United States, almost every country, China, Russia, Japan, the Koreas, have a long-range transportation plan, which are essentially smart cities. But really, if the theories are true that these fires were started to turn Los Angeles into a smart city, then what location would really be next? So I did a little digging, I did a little research, and I searched what city is next to be a smart city. And what popped up was, according to recent reports, cities like Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, California, Seattle, Washington, and San Francisco, California are considered frontrunners to become smart cities due to their strong technology infrastructure and focus on green initiatives, with Austin often cited as the most likely to achieve this status, first based on current trends. Now, I thought Austin, Texas was pretty interesting because last year there were wildfires breaking out in Texas, and I was wondering if Austin was one of those locations where these wildfires were breaking out. So I searched Austin, Texas wildfire, and I don't believe Austin, Texas was one of the locations that these wildfires were breaking out last year, but there are some pretty interesting articles that are coming out this year. Matter of fact, one of these articles came out today. Look at this article from KSST Radio that was published on January 15th, and let me know if this is a quote-unquote coincidence. This article says, could Austin be the next LA wildfire location? Austin, Texas is grappling with increasing fire concerns as changing environmental conditions and urban growth amplify risk across the region. Local officials, residents, and fire safety experts are raising alarms about the heightened potential for wildfires, property damage, and threats to public safety. These concerns are driven by the combination of prolonged drought, rising temperatures, and rapid urban expansion into fire-prone areas. Isn't that just interesting? A very ominous title that Austin could be the next Los Angeles when it comes to wildfires. But the same exact location that's the #1 spot to be a smart city, the #1 choice, is also the same exact location where they have a lot of concerns about wildfires. And they are now getting these articles out there to let us know about these wildfires. So there's no surprise when a wildfire occurs in Austin. They are also letting us know that it'll be the climate they blame and other factors. So when this wildfire does break out and you start to connect the dots between the wildfires and the smart city, they'll just go ahead and say, well, we warned you, we told you it was the climate. It was these other factors. There is absolutely nothing suspicious going on here. But again, the article just goes on to say how the ongoing drought, the increase of population, they are saying that a wildfire is definitely in Austin's future. The article ends with the Austin city officials are trying to address these concerns, but the challenges, they are significant. Look at this article that came out 5 days ago from KXAN News. Austin Metro ranks among highest wildfire risk in the United States, analysis shows. Again, the exact same location that is ripe to be a smart city. Now, coincidence? I don't know, but this article even goes on to reference Los Angeles multiple times. The article goes on to say that so far in 2025, there have been 22 wildland fires in Texas, amounting to 196.1 acres burned. According to data from the National Geographic Area Coordination Center, as firefighters and crews continue to battle the multiple fires in the greater Los Angeles area, a wildfire analysis report released last year gave further insight into the risks both Texas and Austin face. Now, like I said, the article just goes on to say how Austin ranks among the highest when it comes to wildfires. I think it's right below California and right below Colorado. Now, on the same day, there was a suspicious article that came out remembering the disastrous Central Texas wildfires in 2011. And this wildfire happened 14 years ago on Labor Day. And for whatever reason, all of a sudden, they want to talk about, they want people to remember this wildfire that happened in Austin, again, 14 years ago on Labor Day. It's not even the anniversary of these wildfires. The article goes on to say that on September 4th, 2011, the ingredients came together to create a Central Texas wildfire disaster, a persistent drought, gusty winds caused by a storm system hundreds of miles away, and record high temperatures. That Labor Day weekend saw dozens of wildfires spring up across Texas, the most disastrous happening within 50 miles of Austin. Maybe they're talking about this due to the wildfires in Los Angeles, who really knows? But again, it's just very interesting, all this wildfire talk connected to Austin now, which again is a city where supposedly they really want to build a smart city. Look at this article from Fox 7, which was published on January 10th. Is Austin prepared for a wildfire outbreak? Then there's this interesting video where somebody or somebody's is intentionally setting fires throughout Austin. And you can even hear this person say that all it takes is one spark to cause a wildfire.
Smoke seen from all over the Austin area coming from this fire on Peaceful Hill Lane in South Austin. An abandoned 18-wheeler and piles of tires on fire. Austin Fire bringing in a skid steer and drone to help fight the fire. AFD says the bird's eye view helps them figure out how large the fire is, how many resources are needed, and if any buildings nearby could be impacted. Austin firefighters working to put this one out for about an hour. Monday morning, this is what's left. Charred items and a mangled mess. And on Sunday, another fire in an area known to have homeless people off East Bend White Boulevard in East Austin. More tires on fire, spreading to grass and light brush. Then early Monday morning, a fire on the back porch and inside this two-story home. This is on Handbridge Lane in Southwest Austin. Flames seen through the roof. It took about an hour and a half for firefighters to knock out this fire.
It only takes one spark. One spark can cause a wildfire.
Heather Gonzalez with Texas A&M Forest Service says this cold weather makes it even more dangerous.
It's just really, really being cautious of your actions that can cause a spark and reducing those and being safe going about your outdoor activities.
Just some things to keep in mind, just some interesting connections, given the fact that again, Austin is targeted to be the next smart city. But in any
Coffee, follow me.